Chapter 141, High Court. While Arthur led the mountain regulars to clear bandits from Starfall City's territory over the course of 7 days, ravens carried word of the tournament to the great houses of Dorne, the Reach, and the Stormlands. At the Mander River dock in the Reach, the ship Great Mace slipped into the quay. Mina Tyrell stood on its deck, the cool Mander breeze brushing her face. She was no longer young, but she retained a quiet dignity. She gathered the wind-blown chestnut hair at her nape. Her silk sleeve had slipped down, revealing the Redwine signet bracelet of grapevines on her wrist, a gift from Earl Paxton Redwine after she had borne him twin sons. "My lady, we have arrived," the captain reminded her softly, interrupting her thoughts. Mina drew a deep breath. The Reach air, a heady mix of roses, grapes, and ripe wheat, filled her nostrils. Since her marriage to Paxton and her life at the Arbor, she had returned to Highgarden only a few times. Each visit was brief and usually burdened with Redwine business. Each departure stung with the sharp words of her mother, the Queen of Thorns. Servants had already lined the dock. Mina smoothed her long green-blue velvet gown, a shade chosen to hint at her Tyrell blood while keeping the Redwine household's dignity. 10 guards in Arbor livery fell into step around her, a moving cordon. "Welcome back to Highgarden, Lady Mina." An elderly steward bowed. "Lady Olenna waits for you in the inner city." Mina inclined her head, but let her eyes go past him to the castle on the hill. Highgarden's rise was broad and gentle, its marble walls still the same, 3 concentric curtain walls flowing like a lady's layered skirts, rising in height and thickness as the ground climbed. Slender towers dotted the slopes, catching the last light of the day and gilding the stone. She passed through the bustle at the docks and took the pebble path that wound up toward the castle. Wild roses grew along the way, pinks and whites swaying as if to welcome an absent daughter home. The outer gate stood open. Guards recognized a Tyrell and bowed. Mina's gaze lingered on the thorn maze between the outer and middle walls, that tangle of hedged passages and prickly barriers that had long been both playground and defense. Invaders unfamiliar with its many turns could easily be turned back. To those raised within Highgarden, its ways were as natural as breathing. Mina remembered running the maze as a child. At 7, she could find the center alone. At 12, she discovered shortcuts the gardeners never guessed at. Her fingertips brushed the neatly trimmed thorn hedge and felt the faint prickle from the tiny thorns, a small familiar sting, much like her mother's retorts, sharp and often true. Left, right, straight for 30 paces, then under the hidden archway. In less than 10 minutes, she was before the inner city gate. A stranger might take half an hour. The inner city took her breath. It was brighter than she remembered. Fountain spray refracting the sun into rainbows, ancient stone buildings clasped in ivy and profuse blossoms, marble figures half hidden by tendrils of green. The air was thick with roses, lavender, lemon trees, and the scent of damp earth. A servant in a bright green livery approached and bowed. "Lady Mina, Lady Olenna, and Miss Margaery are in the rose garden. They've been listening to Butterbump sing." Mina waved a hand. Her sleeve whispered, "I know the way. You may go." The servant hesitated a moment, bowed again, and withdrew. Mina walked the pebble path, passing beds she knew by name, the tall white rose she had planted as a child, the lavender her father had brought back from a cliff when he hunted hawks for her 10th name day. Around a fountain pool, the sound of the jester Butterbump's comic song and a girl's bell-like laughter floated from a rose-clad pavilion. Mina straightened her collar and moved forward. Inside the pavilion, Olenna Redwine, the Queen of Thorns, lounged in a cushioned wicker chair. Over 70 and carved deep by years, her face was lined, but her eyes were keen. She wore a dark purple robe. Her silver hair was drawn back and held with a net of amethysts. Beside her sat Margaery Tyrell, the Rose of Highgarden, brown curls, large almond eyes, and a pale pink gown that caught the light and showed her graceful carriage. When Margaery smiled, the whole garden seemed to brighten. Butterbump's song cut off as Mina's shadow fell across the steps. All eyes turned to her. "Who can tell me who this woman is?" Olenna snapped, glancing at Margaery and then around the pavilion. "And why is she here?" Mina's fingers tightened on the hem of her skirt. Her mother's manner had not softened with time. Margaery rose quickly, her skirts unfurling like petals. This is Aunt Mina, grandmother. Have you forgotten your own daughter? Mina gave her niece a grateful look. The last time she had seen Margaery, she had been a girl. Now she moved with the easy assurance of a lady. Mina stepped into the pavilion. Mother, it has been a long time. Olenna's first response was a disapproving snort. Of course I remember the children I bore. She turned her sharp gaze to Mina. The last time I saw you was when Garland married that Fossaway girl, over 2 years ago. I thought perhaps you had forgotten you had a mother. Mina sat in the empty chair beside her, Silk whispering. Paxton needs my help at the arbor. I cannot simply leave his halls to run themselves. Oh, please, Olenna said, waving one hand and dismissing Butterbump. The jester bobbed and wobbled out of the pavilion. Your father Luther was a fool, hawking when he should have been tending his house. I ran Highgarden when I was young. I managed all its affairs and still had time to bear you and your brothers. She sneered. He, for his part, wanted nothing but falcons in the sky. He never watched the path beneath his feet, and one day he fell from a cliff. Chapter 142, Rose, 2-in-1. Mina's lips curved into a bitter smile. Her father had been dead for 30 years, but her mother's voice still sharpened when she spoke of him. She poured a cup of mint tea and handed it to Olenna with a measured respect. Mother, not everyone has your talents. That makes me angrier. Olenna took the cup and sipped. I taught you everything, and yet you're like a wooden fish, uncooperative, slow to learn. Especially our blowfish Arthur, a spiteful nickname for her son, Mace Tyrell, Duke of Highgarden. I truly regret never thwacking that foolish head of his with a wooden spoon when he was a child, to pound some sense into him. Maybe then he wouldn't have been so foolish as to let that novice Loras face the Red Viper and come back crippled, the only capable man in the Tyrell line. Margaery squeezed her grandmother's soft hand. Grandmother, my eldest brother said it was an accident. He still writes to Oberyn Martell a great deal about breeding good falcons and horses. Olenna shook her head. The pendant in her silver hair flashed in the sun. Your father, our blowfish Mace, doesn't believe that. He's convinced the Red Viper used foul means to cripple the next Longthorn Leo of House Tyrell, whom he coveted. Mana listened quietly. She knew Longthorn Leo had been famed in Tyrell history for his prowess with the lance, a towering figure in the lists. Mace had always wanted his eldest son to inherit that mantle, but Loras had been gravely wounded in a duel with Oberyn Martell at 16 and now walked with a cane. Olenna's sharp gaze turned to Mina. All right, Mina, you come to Highgarden to find me, an old woman with half her teeth gone, a cane to steady her, and ears that fail me at times. What is it for? Mina's fingers found the grape pattern on her gold bracelet and rubbed it unconsciously. She drew a breath and laid out Paxton's plan in full. The quality of the amber peach wine, Starfall City's organized production, the scale and method of its manufacture, and the threat it posed to House Redwine. Paxton's aim, she explained, was to secure influence, one of his sons to marry Alilia, Edric to become a squire, to dominate or even seize the trade in amber peach wine. Mina spoke without hiding anything. She trusted that, despite her barbed tongue and habitual mockery of family fools, her mother cared for the interests of House Tyrell above all. Margaery's brown eyes brightened with curiosity. Is this amber peach wine really as good as golden wine? Mina prepared to answer, but noticed Olenna's unusual silence. The old woman's face was unreadable, her eyes narrowed like a hawk considering a kill. Mina knew that look well. Olenna weighing risks and rewards. Olenna had been born a Redwine. She knew what the wine could mean, and why Paxton pushed so hard. Fetch the amber peach wine I brought, Mina told the maid standing outside the pavilion. It's in the red wooden box with my luggage, the jug sealed with an oak barrel. The maid hurried off, and the pavilion filled with the quiet of the fountain and distant birds. Footsteps cut through the hush. Mina turned as a tall young man approached, brown curls of Tyrell hair tied in a loose knot at the nape of his neck. He was handsome as a carved statue, his gold eyes like warm metal in the sun, and sky-blue velvet set off his lithe figure. Mina recognized him at once. Loras Tyrell, Mace's third son. Aunt Mina. Loras bowed with the practiced grace of a courtier. His voice was smooth as a harp. I didn't expect to find you in Highgarden. Loras, weren't you serving as Sir Renly's squire? Mina smiled. When did you return? Loras straightened, pride flashing in his gaze. "I've been knighted by Sir Renly. I plan to visit grandmother and my sister, and then go on to King's Landing to continue serving Sir Renly." "Planned?" Mina caught the word. "Has something changed?" A fighting light came to Loras's face. "The Maester just brought a raven from Starfall City. They're holding a grand tourney to celebrate Sir Arthur Snow being made the new Sword of the Morning." His enthusiasm flared. "This is a rare opening. I intend to go to Starfall City, ride in the lists, and see if the Sword of the Morning is really as formidable as they say." Margaery blinked. "The Dane family's sword, Dawn, isn't supposed to pass to strangers, is it? Snow is a bastard name from the north." Mina spotted a quick gleam in Olenna's eyes. The old woman said nothing, clearly ruminating. "Sir Arthur Snow is the bastard son of Brandon Stark and Ashara Dane," Mina said, watching her mother. "He was knighted by the Red Viper, and Starfall is prospering under him. The amber peach wine is produced there." The maid returned carrying a delicate oak wine jug. Mina poured the amber liquid into a glass and handed it to her mother. Olenna didn't drink at once. She studied the color, swirled the glass, inhaled deeply, and finally raised it to her lips. Her eyes widened, then closed as she let the taste linger. When she opened them again, Mina knew she'd made her judgment. "The quality is indeed near golden wine," Olenna said, a rare note of approval in her voice. "The bouquet is complex, the body full, the finish long. If the yield and consistency are as you claim, it could very well challenge the Arbor's golden wine." Loras and Margaery tasted and nodded. Loras licked his lips, interest bright in his golden eyes. "This reminds me of Dorne's Summer Red, with a peach sweetness all its own. Sir Renly will like it. When I get to Starfall, I'll buy some with the prize money from the lists." He looked at Margaery and grinned. "Little sister, do you want to come? I'll make you Queen of Love and Beauty." Before Margaery could answer, Olenna's eyes cut to her grandson. "If you mean to ride off to Starfall to bash heads with a spear, be properly prepared," her voice hardened. "I don't want to see a second grandson maimed in the lists. Grandmother, I won't have accidents." Loras's hand drifted to the sword at his hip. "My skill with the lance is better than Garland's." Perhaps wary of another of Olenna's barbs, he bowed and excused himself. He winked at Margaery as he left, a clear invitation for her to accompany him. Mina watched him go, tall, handsome, confident, everything that turned girls' heads. She couldn't help but compare him to her own sons, Horaz and Haber, the same age but plain and ordinary. She hoped they might prove themselves if they ever found themselves in the lists. At least jousting required a helmet and plate, not looks. When Loras's footsteps faded, Olenna turned to Mina. "Paxton's judgment is sound," she said. "We must move to secure that amber peach wine by marriage and agreement. I support your plan." Mina felt the knot in her chest loosen. "And Mace?" Olenna snorted. "Mace treats me like a nagging old woman. He smiles or lets my words fly past his ears. Still, he'll listen a little if we press the matter." She tapped the wicker armrest with a thoughtful finger. "Marriage and fostering require two willing parties. Starfall answers to Dorne. Smooth dealings aren't guaranteed. But a grand tourney, that will bring many nobles together. It's an opportunity." Mina nodded, taking in the hint. A tourney would gather lords and ladies from across the Seven Kingdoms, an ideal place to cultivate matches and allegiances. Before she could say more, Olenna waved a hand. "All right, Mina. You've had a long, tiring voyage by ship. Rest in the room you once used. The servants have always kept it ready for you." Her voice softened a touch. "Come, join our blowfish Arthur for dinner, and we'll speak more." Mina's heart fluttered. She hadn't realized her room had been kept for her after all these years. For a lifetime she had come and gone from Highgarden without staying. A flood of feelings swept her, guilt, nostalgia, and a warm, forgotten sense of belonging. "Thank you, Mother." She stood and kissed Olenna's cheek, voice trembling slightly. As she left the pavilion, she looked back. Sunlight sifted through the rose vines and painted grandmother and granddaughter in shifting light. Olenna spoke quietly. Margaery listened, nodding. Mina forced a small smile. She knew her mother well. When she wanted Mina to know something, she would say it in time. Her old corridor led to an oak door, she remembered. Pushing it open, Mina almost wept. The room was as she'd left it. The four-poster bed draped in a cover embroidered with the golden rose, the poetry collections she loved on the desk, and a small white flower on the windowsill, clearly renewed by attentive hands. She opened the window. Outside, Highgarden unfolded in a tapestry of terraces, winding streams, and distant fields of wheat. Sunlight warmed her face, and for a moment, she was not Lady Redwine or an envoy with a mission. She was simply Olenna's child, a daughter of Highgarden. In the Rose Pavilion, Olenna and Margaery continued their conversation. "Grandmother, the wine is wonderful." Margaery swirled her glass. The amber liquid trembled in the light. "I wish I could drink it every day." Olenna smiled with that sly knowledge she always wore. Margaery had been raised and taught by her. Of course, she meant not the wine itself, but the influence and profits it represented. "Loras is no longer a boy," Olenna said, fingers threading through her granddaughter's soft brown hair. Margaery's eyes brightened, then faltered. "Do you mean you want Loras to marry Alilia?" Olenna snorted. "Loras would never accept that. He likes knocking men from horses, not thinking long-term. Among Tyrell men, only your eldest brother. Well, Loras is the only one with a sensible head on his shoulders, but his damaged leg means he can't go to Starfall." Margaery caught the hint readily. "Grandmother, do you want me to go?" Olenna's smile sharpened like an old fox's. "Seeing how excited Loras is, you must realize the Starfall tourney, what with the new Sword of the Morning, will draw young talent from across the kingdoms." She looked at Margaery with meaning. "A gathering of the great is the place for the Rose of Highgarden to bloom, not for you to sit at home listening to me all day." Margaery nestled her head against Olenna's lap. "Grandmother, I like listening to you scold me. I don't want to go to tourneys." Olenna smoothed the wisps at Margaery's temple with a steady hand. "When Loras sets off, take your cousins and retinue and go with him." Her tone turned indulgent. "As for what you do in Starfall, do as you please. I will back you." Margaery's smile unfolded like a blossom. Sunlight slanted through the rose bushes, dappling the two of them in gold. Outside, Highgarden remained a picture of beauty. Inside the pavilion, the Queen of Thorns was sending her cherished rose out of the greenhouse to bloom on a larger stage. Chapter 143, Prejudice in People's Minds, 2-in-1. The morning sun cast a golden sheen over the flat stretch of land between Shingy Fort and Dawn Market. Arthur pulled Zephyr to a halt. He knew this place well. It had once been the old instructor's training camp for recruits, and later the makeshift site where Arthur had confined the captured barbarians. "Arthur, what do you think?" Fat Karen rode up, beads of sweat gleaming on his round face. The Starfall City administrator always looked awkward on horseback. His broad hips shifted nervously in the saddle. Arthur didn't answer right away. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the dry earth without kicking up much dust. He crouched, scooped a handful of soil, rubbed it between his fingers, and judged the texture. "The ground's firm and there's grass," he said, standing and clapping his hands. "It won't kick up too much dust from the horses' hooves and obscure the knights or the spectators." "Exactly," Fat Karen agreed, clambering down awkwardly. "And the terrain's flat, with existing barracks, stables, and a blacksmith shop." He pointed towards several rows of wooden and stone buildings in the distance. "We only need to build the spectator stands and level the field. It'll meet all the tournament requirements." They walked toward the workers. Timber was being moved, stones hammered, the clang of tools ringing over the open field. An older man with gray hair set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his dirty apron when he saw Arthur approach. "Quentin," Arthur greeted. "Main structure of the stands will be done in 3 days," Quentin said, pointing to the wooden frame already up. "We're reinforcing it on the old stone foundations and building the upper tiers with fresh oak. At most a week, and horses can gallop here for the tournament." Arthur nodded, surveying the bustle. A young apprentice struggling to drag a beam stumbled. Arthur stepped forward and steadied the wobbling timber with one hand while steadying the startled boy with the other. "Be careful," he said gently, straightening the beam as if it were nothing. The boy's eyes went wide. He hadn't expected Arthur to help. Thank you, Dawn. Dawn Sword Arthur," he stammered, face flushing. Arthur patted his shoulder and turned to Quentin. "Make sure everyone gets enough water and rest, especially at noon. I don't want this tournament built on the backs of exhausted men." After leaving the construction site, Arthur and Fat Karen rode south, inspecting the expansion of Shingi Fort and Dawn Market. Merchants and farmers bowed as they passed. Arthur returned every salute. He noticed rows of new stone houses with red tile roofs glinting in the sun. "These new buildings are solid," Fat Karen said, wiping his brow. "They'll house merchants, spectators, and the knights during the tournament. We've stored 3 months' worth of grain in the warehouses and brought in peach wine, summer red, and peaches from Peach Garden. The amber peach wines in Starfall City cellar." Arthur entered a warehouse, ran his fingers over sacks of grain to check for damp or pests, and lifted the lid of a wine barrel. The aroma of peach wine rose up. He tasted a small cup and nodded appreciatively. It was the familiar, mellow flavor of peach wine. He moved between Dawn Market and Shingi Fort and didn't return to Starfall City until dusk. Passing the training ground, the clash of metal and the sound of hooves drew his attention. A dozen or more knights and squires were still practicing. One knight charged a wooden dummy at full gallop. His lance struck true and sent the target spinning. Archers took turns at distant targets. One figure was especially focused, Jimmy Sunderland, his squire. Leaning against the fence, Arthur watched. Jimmy's archery form was nearly perfect. Steady breath, fixed gaze, and his arrow flew to the bullseye. His companions murmured with admiration, but Jimmy simply knocked another arrow and continued. "He's been at it all day," a familiar voice said behind Arthur. "From sunrise until now, hardly any rest, except for water." Arthur turned to see the old instructor approaching with his arms crossed. "He'll wear himself out," Arthur said, frowning. "Even a man of iron needs rest." The old instructor shrugged. "I tried to persuade him, but that boy, even though he's from the Three Sisters, is stubborn as a Dorn wild donkey. Ever since you promised to knight him if he won the archery contest, he's practiced like a madman." The old man's voice held a note of admiration. "I must admit, his progress is astonishing. In archery, few in Starfall City can match Jimmy." Arthur remembered promising the boy that if he placed in the archery competition, he would be knighted with the name Dawn. He hadn't expected Jimmy to throw himself into practice so relentlessly. Dinner was held in the small, brightly lit dining room of Starfall City. The long table groaned under roasted venison, honeyed quail, and fresh sea fish. Arthur sat at the head. His aunt, Illyria Dane, wore a deep blue gown that set off her elegant neck and collarbones and sat to his right. "The first distinguished guests from the Reach arrived 3 days ago," Illyria said, slicing a piece of nut-sprinkled bread with a silver knife. "The red wine family from the Arbor." "Aren't they across a strait?" Arthur said around a mouthful of venison. "They came that fast?" Illyria smiled with a touch of irony. "Lord Paxter must have sent word and shoved his twin sons below decks, and they sailed straight away. Otherwise, how else could they have arrived so quickly? I wish they'd come more slowly," she added without enthusiasm, setting down her fork. "The Red Wine twins, Sir Horace and Sir Hobber, visit every morning. They bring gifts, silks, jewelry, roses of all colors." She trailed off into a sigh. Arthur noticed her mood. "You don't like them?" She looked up, helplessness in her deep blue, almost violet eyes. "They're polite, and their talk of the Reach Knights is interesting, but—" she fidgeted with her bread. "Their appearance is so plain, orange hair and square faces freckled all over. And their father, Lord Paxter, though well-dressed and eloquent, he's almost completely bald, with a few pathetic tufts of reddish hair clinging to his scalp." Just then, Edric blurted, "Red-haired egghead." The boy froze, realizing his slip. He covered his mouth, eyes round and guilty. Arthur fought back a laugh, then shot the lad a stern look. "Damn it, Ed, who taught you to call people names?" It was from Prince Oberyn's stories," the boy mumbled, shrinking. Arthur truly hadn't taught Edric such things. On the road back from Sunspear, Oberyn had indeed told many tales. Arthur remembered Oberyn describing how, when he was young, he mocked his sister Ilya's suitors endlessly. There was Arthur with the lazy eyelids, the gentleman with jam lips, and one I called the land whale. One decent fellow was young Baelor Hightower until he farted at a gathering, so I dubbed him Fart Wind. Baelor and Ilya never looked on him the same afterward. I was a monster in my youth. I should have bitten my tongue. The memory made Arthur's mouth twitch, but he quickly quelled the smile and lectured Edric seriously. "You shouldn't pick up those mean nicknames. Boys must keep basic courtesy, especially about other families. Illyria patted Edric's hand. Though that nickname is apt, she said, trying not to smile. Your cousin is right. We don't use those words outside. She covered a corner of her mouth, still amused, and continued. The problem is, every time I see Sir Horace and Sir Hobber now, I can't get their father's bald head out of my mind. Arthur almost felt sorry for the Redwine twins. No matter how wealthy or well-mannered, once a woman fixes such an image in her head, it's hard to change. Prejudice in people's minds can be more stubborn than the heat of Dorne. Cousin, at the tournament, will I see Ilya and the other sand snakes? Edric asked. Arthur, glancing at Illyria, said, I don't know. Don't ask me. He wasn't really addressing Edric, but his aunt. As Edric's guardian, Arthur knew he should be more attentive to the boy's education, but between preparing for the tournament and chasing bandits, he'd had little time to teach the child. Illyria took a thoughtful sip of amber peach wine. Lord Paxter did ask about taking Edric as a squire. At his age, it's time to be placed, she said, setting down her glass and looking Arthur in the eye. Arthur, I want to change his environment, refine his manners. Edric, who had been looking sheepish, immediately protested, face reddening. I don't want to be Lord Paxter's squire. I want to be your squire. Sending children to be fostered in other noble houses was a common way to build ties. Arthur agreed with Illyria. It would broaden the boy's horizons. He exchanged a look with his aunt. I agree, he said, glancing at the reluctant Edric. But it doesn't have to be Lord Paxter. At the tournament, nobles from all over will gather. We can find someone more suitable. Ed relaxed and attacked the roasted cod on his plate. Thinking of Lord Paxter, Arthur asked, You mentioned his family. What's the Count himself been doing these past days? Edric's mouth already full, replied around a chew. After visiting, he went to Lighthouse Keep, saying he wanted to see the Peach Garden residence and the winery. Arthur's eyes narrowed. He wasn't surprised. The Redwines had made their fortune from wine, and the Peach Garden's amber peach wine would surely interest them. The letter from the arbor and the twins' eager behavior signaled Lord Paxter's intentions. If the profit-sharing was fair, Arthur thought, he wouldn't be against cooperation with the Redwine family. Chapter 144, 70% of it still belongs to others. On the morning of the second day, Arthur met the red-haired egghead lord Ed had warned him about, Earl Paxton. The Earl had returned from Lighthouse Keep to Starfall City the day before and come to visit with his children that morning. He entered through the small hall doorway with slightly rounded shoulders, the posture of a man who had spent years bent over ledgers. He wore a blue silk gown. Dark purple grapes were embroidered across his chest and seemed to ripple like strings of jewels as he moved. His head was exactly as Illyria had described, bald, except for a few clumps of orange-yellow hair. Lord Paxton, Arthur said with a polite smile and a small bow, I hear you've come to my lands. How do you like them? They're splendid, Paxton replied easily. Even in the Reach, I have never seen a peach orchard on this scale. Sir Arthur, congratulations on becoming the Sword of the Morning. To receive such an honor without the Dane name, well, I've never witnessed that. Arthur gestured to a seat at the long oak table. A servant brought out chilled amber peach wine from the cellar. Paxton took a slow sip, his Adam's apple bobbing beneath relaxed skin. Sir, I heard you grew up in Winterfell and only came to Starfall City later, he said. Yes, that's where the surname comes from. Arthur traced a circle on the rim of his cup. I spent my childhood in Winterfell, raised and taught by my uncle Eddard. I have met Duke Eddard, Paxton said, eyes softening with memory, his fingers stroking the grape embroidery on his sleeve. A just, honorable man. During Robert's rebellion, he marched south and lifted the siege of Storm's End through a single negotiation, sparing much bloodshed. Arthur almost choked on his wine at the line. To hear Robert's rebellion, framed like that by a Redwine, was striking. House Redwine had not exactly been on the same side back then. He kept his expression neutral. My uncle's version was rather different, Arthur said, setting his cup down with a dull thunk. He told me that Duke Mace and your fleet from the Arbor besieged Storm's End for a year. The defenders were driven to the edge of starvation, horses gone, cats and dogs eaten, reduced to roots and rats and even shoe leather. They were close to consuming their dead. Paxton's brow went tight for a moment. His fingertips drummed an uneasy beat on the table. Arthur went on. If a notorious smuggler hadn't slipped a ship laden with onions and salted fish into the harbor, Storm's End wouldn't have held out until my uncle came south. Taking Storm's End, that's an honor the Reach has rarely accomplished. Arthur suspected, privately, that the Onion Knight's ship had not simply slipped in by accident. Perhaps Paxton or his allies had allowed it, keeping Stannis alive so there would be someone to bargain with. If Stannis had died, there would have been no negotiation, and the Reach might have faced a far worse fate. Paxton laughed then, a noise like a rooster caught mid-crow. Let us not dwell on old grievances. He raised his cup. The amber wine flashed in the sunlight. Let us speak of cooperation, about this peach wine of yours and the other vintages from your lands. Arthur straightened. At last, they were to business. It would be an honor to work with the Arbor, he said evenly. What sort of cooperation do you propose? Paxton leaned forward, elbows on the table, making his narrow shoulders more pronounced. Arbor has an extensive and seasoned trade fleet that sails to ports across the world, even as far as Ashai by the Shadow. All the wine produced in Starfall City could be entrusted to my house for sale. We can take it to distant markets and fetch better prices. His finger traced an imaginary shipping route on the table. People pay more for rare goods transported far. With the red wine mark on the casks, buyers will trust the wine and be willing to pay more. Arthur could not deny the truth of it. House Redwine had built a brand and distribution network over generations. Merchants and nobles in the free cities might never have heard of Starfall's amber peach wine, but they knew Arbor's name, and label a product with that crest, and it would sell faster and for more. What will the profit split be? Arthur asked, meeting Paxton's gaze. Paxton smiled and held up 3 fingers. Starfall City handles the brewing and production. You don't worry about anything else, and receives 30% of the wine's sale profits. Arthur's face betrayed nothing, but inwardly he burned. He had wrestled his way out of Winterfell for 6 years. Now 70% would belong to someone else. He lowered his voice a notch. Couldn't it be higher? Lord Paxton, 30% seems a little low. I don't see much sincerity in that offer. Paxton spread his hands, silk sleeves sliding back to show wrists freckled with age. Maintaining shipping routes and customers, repairs to ships, and the many unforeseen dangers at sea, all that costs. Besides, once your wine bears our mark, its price will increase. 30% of a far larger income will be far more than you get now. Arthur sipped his wine in silence. No matter how persuasive Paxton sounded, the 30% offer felt stingy. If this was his final pitch rather than a test, there seemed little point in pressing further. Noticing Arthur's reticence, Paxton leaned in. Of course, that split isn't immutable. We in the Arbor hope for a long-term relationship with Starfall. To show our sincerity, I'd like Miss Illyria to marry my son, he said, tapping the table with a finger. That would raise your share by 10%. He watched Arthur's face. If young Count Edric comes to the Arbor as my son's squire, another 10% can be added. When Edric comes of age, I would also propose betrothing my daughter, Desmara Redwine, to him. Arthur almost rolled his eyes. He remembered the remarks at last night's dinner, Illyria and Edric's subtle mockery still fresh in his ears. The red-haired egghead. Desmara's dull. She doesn't like riding, can't swing a sword or spear, and has no skill at Savas. And an image of Ser Horus and Ser Haber, both bald, had lodged in Illyria's teasing mind. Prejudice, he thought, is often harder to thaw than Dorne's son. Noble marriages were business first and rarely love. Yet Arthur had hoped, perhaps naively, that Illyria could choose freely, even love whom she chose. He had promised his support and had arranged this tournament for her sake. House Dane and House Redwine are both old and noble, he said carefully. A union between them could be good, but marriages and wards are serious matters. I need to speak with Illyria and with Edric to learn their wishes. Please give me some time. Paxton frowned. How long will you need? Arthur nearly answered the next lifetime, but instead kept his courtesy. Lord Paxton, please enjoy the tournament first. After it concludes, we can discuss cooperation. He remained polite partly because, despite everything, he allowed for the tiny chance of a miracle. Perhaps Illyria might yet fall for one of the Redwine twins. Chapter 145. the influence of the Dawnblade. Participating in a tournament and hosting one proved to be two very different things. In Sunspear, Arthur could spend whole days sparring with Daemon Sand under the burning sun with blunted lances. He could stroll the streets with Edric and the others, tasting Dornish fire-pepper grilled snake and sipping summer red, letting the heat and the cool sweetness mingle on his tongue. But hosting the Starfall City tournament taught him how exhausting and stressful organizing an event like this truly was. Arthur had planned the lists for the grounds, lodging, provisions, and even security in advance, but as the tournament drew near, problems surged like the tide. The fame of the Sword of the Morning and the generous prizes had drawn people from all over. Merchants hawked their wares, troops put up colorful tents and practiced acrobatics, knights strode through the streets with their heads high, while squires bustled about polishing their armor. Lords, mercenaries, bards, people of every sort crowded Starfall City's territory, turning this normally quiet stretch of the Torrentine into a noisy, congested hub. Crowds brought excitement, but also chaos. Theft, brawls, robbery, and worse incidents, rape and murder, followed in quick succession, leaving Sir Elric, the captain of the guard, overwhelmed. In the small hall of the main keep, Sir Elric strode in, candlelight glinting on the sweat on his brow. He took off his helm, wiped his face, and his voice was threadbare with fatigue. "Arthur, I must increase our numbers. I've sent out every guard I can spare, but there are simply too many people. They're a mixed lot, unmanageable." He laid out the recent horrors. A headless body found hanging in an orchard, a woman's head floating in the public pool, a Dornishman who'd plunged a dagger into a Riverlander, and several Starfall City guards wounded trying to stop fights between bickering noble retainers. The unrest was edging toward chaos. "I've recalled Sir Bard from Violet Canyon," Arthur said. "The Mountain Regular Army will take over security around the tournament grounds. And I authorize you to recruit 30 more guards. Fund the expense." He glanced at his administrator. "Karen, make a note." Karen, the portly administrator buried under a mound of papers, looked up, wiped his forehead, drew a sheet of parchment, dipped his pen, and quickly wrote a funding order. He handed it to Arthur. "Please sign and seal." Arthur stamped it deftly. Sir Elric put the order away with a visible loosening of tension. "There's another problem," he went on. "We can handle commoner disputes, but when nobles clash, especially Dornish and Riverland houses, the situation is precarious." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Arrest them. Lock them in the dungeon. Tell them the Court of Me and Counts Mathis Rowan, Franklin Fowler, and Selwyn Tarth will judge them. If they resist, break their hands and feet, but avoid killing them if you can." Sir Elric bowed. "As you command." "Inform Sir Bard," Arthur added. The captain's step as he left was noticeably lighter than when he had arrived. As host, Arthur found himself fielding an endless stream of criminal cases. Disputes among commoners could be handled by law, but when nobles and the grudges between regions were involved, one small mistake could inflame an entire faction. It was Maester Oswell's suggestion that finally steadied the approach. Invite one reputable, influential lord, each from the Riverlands, Dorne, and the Stormlands, to sit as judges and jointly rule disputes among nobles during the tournament. That way, decisions would carry weight and stand less chance of favoring one region over another. The older the ginger, the spicier it gets, Arthur thought with a dry inward smile. Just then, an usher hurried in and handed him a list. "Arthur, these are the contestants who've signed up so far." The list was long. The jousting roster alone contained hundreds of names. These were all knights, and there was still nearly a week until the tournament began. Arthur felt a flicker of surprise at how much the title Sword of the Morning drew men. Then he remembered its history. It was a title from the Age of Heroes, a brand whose reputation stretched across the Seven Kingdoms, much like Arbor's name did in wine. "This will be a grand tournament," the usher said, rubbing his hands, "far bigger than the one in Sunspear." The joust rules were simple knockout rounds, one-on-one, losers eliminated, winners advancing until a final champion was declared. Arthur scanned the list, found a name he wanted to see entered, and handed it back with satisfaction. "I hope the excitement outpaces that time." Karen looked up from his paperwork, wiping sweat from his brow with a rueful smile. "I just hope I live to see the end of it." Arthur smiled. He meant it when he reassured the fat administrator that it was worth it. Reports from Pete and Carl By had shown booming sales. Wine orders for the Peach Garden and weapons orders for the blacksmith district were off the charts. The fame of the Sword of the Morning made preparing for the tournament a hard scramble, but it had already paid off in gold dragons, and more than that. After sampling the amber peach wine, lords and nobles began to visit Peach Garden in droves, most from the Riverlands and the Stormlands. They wanted to taste the brew and, not unsubtly, examine how something so fine could be produced in Dorne. If Dornish growers could make amber peach wine comparable to the finest vintage, some of those lords might try to replicate the orchards and the brewing in their own lands. The knights and warriors coming to the tournament, meanwhile, praised the high quality and reasonable prices of arms and armor from the blacksmith district. The advantage was not only in reduced costs, but in organization. Violet Canyon supplied labor through reform gang work in the mines. Ironstone Fort centralized raw iron ore and coal, and the water hammers of the blacksmith district cut labor needs. With control over the entire supply chain, quality ore, standardized forging procedures, and strict quality control, the district furnished better products at lower cost than the small smithies in castles and towns could manage. Arthur listened to the reports, picturing the ripple effects the tournament was already causing. It was more than sport. It was a force that reshaped trade, reputation, and alliances. The Dawnblade's name had pulled Star and Stake together, and now, as the city braced for the first charge of lances and clanging of steel, Arthur felt the weight of stewardship settle on him in full. Chapter 146. Ask for Leave. Ask for leave. Taking a day off, I hovered near the doorway for a full minute, hands in my pockets, heart doing the ridiculous flutter that always showed up before any conversation that mattered. The office hummed with its usual low-energy chaos, keyboards tapping, phones murmuring, an occasional laugh that didn't reach my ears. I rehearsed what I would say 3 times, and each time it sounded worse than the last. When I finally stepped into my manager's office, she looked up from a stack of papers and gave me that efficient, expectant look she reserved for problems she liked solving. "Yes?" she asked. "I need to take a day off," I said, trying to keep my voice even. She raised an eyebrow. "Is everything all right?" Everything flashed through my head. The 3 late nights in a row, the ache behind my eyes, the way my hands shook if I drank too little water. But what came out was simpler. "I'm tired. I need 1 full day to rest and recharge." She studied me for a beat that felt like a verdict. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Small, almost private. "You've earned it," she said. "When do you want to go?" Relief made my shoulders drop. "Tomorrow, if that's okay." "It's okay," she repeated. She pushed the papers aside and tapped her calendar as if confirming something more important than the deadlines littering her desk. "Take tomorrow. No emails, no calls, and no guilt about it." I left her office feeling like I had been given something more valuable than a day off. Permission. Permission to do nothing, to be unproductive without apology. Permission I hadn't realized I'd been holding myself hostage without. I almost wasted the day by planning too much. I pictured a parade of errands and errands that would somehow make being off feel productive. Then I caught myself and switched tactics. If the point was rest, I decided the plan should be anti-plan. The morning was quiet in the best way. I slept until the late sunlight snuck through the curtains and painted my ceiling gold. I made tea without consulting a recipe box of deadlines. I read a book that had nothing to do with work, laughing out loud in places where I would normally have frowned and annotated. I walked to a nearby cafe and sat with nothing but the steam from my cup and a city that seemed to slow down just for me. On the walk back, I ran into Ari from accounting, carrying 3 potted succulents like they were treasure. We exchanged the kind of small, honest conversation that rarely surfaces during work hours. Favorite childhood cartoons, a recommendation for a new bakery, a confession that both of us missed naps in a way adults pretend they don't. By afternoon, the nagging tension that had lived behind my shoulder blades for months had dissolved into something like ease. I cooked a simple dinner, the kind that tastes better when you've tended it slowly. I smiled at a message from my manager checking in, short and non-intrusive. It felt oddly intimate, that she'd remembered. The day off didn't fix everything. A pile of work still waited on my desk, and somewhere in the back of my head, a to-do list stretched on like a road. But the sharp edges of it all had softened. I slept early, no alarm set, and when the night finally folded over me, I felt lighter than I had in months. The next morning, returning to the office, I realized how much easier it was to breathe. I had come back not because I'd solved everything, but because I'd remembered how to take care of myself. That, it turned out, was the kind of productivity that mattered most. Chapter 147, A Different Approach, 2-in-1. In the afternoon, the dawn market outside Starfall City was still bustling. Voices echoed across the newly expanded square to the east, and a 3-meter-high oak platform cast a dark shadow in the sunlight. 4 chairs carved with longswords and falling stars sat neatly on the dais. Beside it, a newly erected gallows gave off a sickly mix of rot and blood. More than 20 hemp ropes swayed in the breeze. 2 of them already held fresh corpses, toes picked bare by crows until white bones showed. A brazen bird tugged at a string of dark flesh from a rotten eye socket, startling its companions. The crowd below the platform murmured and pressed forward. Several children peered over the heads of adults until their mothers dragged them back. They had come less for the stunts of traveling entertainers than for the spectacle of justice. Arthur walked into the square, wiping sweat from his brow. The orderly tread of Starfall's guards opened a path through the front rows. He had just finished practicing mounted lance work with Damon Sand of Sunspear in the training yard. His linen undershirt was still damp under his leather hauberk. On the platform, Earl Franklin Fowler, the Old Falcon, and Earl Mathis Rowan were talking and laughing like old friends reunited. Arthur had deliberately asked 3 lords to serve as judges. Dorne, the Riverlands, and the Stormlands had long-standing disputes in the borderlands near the Red Mountains, so he avoided inviting lords whose lands bordered Dorne. Mathis Rowan's Golden Grove lay in the northern Riverlands. Selwyn Tarth's Tarth was even farther from Dorne. No local grievances tied them to the Dornish. "Good day, my lords," Arthur said. A knight whose breastplate bore House Tarth's red and white sun and moon sigil struck it with his iron gauntlet and announced, "My lord Selwyn has gone falconing in the Violet Canyon with his daughter and is absent from today's judgment. He bade me apologize." "No need," Arthur said, smiling and waving him off. "Give my regards to Earl Selwyn. I wish his falcons a fruitful hunt." The knight hesitated, bowed, and left. Mathis, a broad-shouldered, clean-shaven man in a tight white doublet embroidered with a golden tree, rolled his shoulders and said, "Selwyn's daughter is the tallest woman I've ever seen. I saw her swordplay once. She's better than most men." The old falcon's knobbly fingers tightened on the eagle's beak carved atop his staff. "There is no place for women on the battlefield. Their place is at the birthing bed. Lord Selwyn should not have allowed her to be taught swordsmanship." Arthur felt the remark tug at a memory, Miss Nemeria's recent letter from Skyreach City, in which she'd declared herself ready to duel Arthur's new mistress with a dagger. He shook his head. The old falcon ought to take that up with the Red Viper, not with him. "My lords, let us begin," Arthur said, turning toward the west side of the square, where a dozen chained prisoners huddled like a bunch of spoiled grapes. The guards brought them forward as the 3 lords took their seats. The first offenses were minor: 3 thieves, a baker who mixed sawdust into loaves, a mercenary who cheated at gambling, and a prostitute who knowingly spread pox among clients. The thieves had a finger chopped on the oak block. The baker was fined 50 silver stags. Lacking the coin, he took 10 lashes, 1 silver stag per lash, and limped away, supported by his wife. The cheating mercenary had the palm he used to cheat pierced with a dagger. The prostitute was ordered to have her private parts washed with lye and was sent to the dungeon. These were precedents with clear penalties. The judgments were quick. Then a man with the arbor grapevine embroidered on his chest broke free of his bonds. Iron chains clanked. "I swear by the warrior," he slurred. "I was so drunk I couldn't recognize my own mother. I didn't know she wasn't—" His swollen eyes rolled. "I'll pay silver gold," Mathis frowned. "You are Sir Prady, a sworn knight of House Redwine. Your actions shame the Arbor and the Riverlands. If the girl will accept compensation, there is room for settlement. Where is the victim?" A guard dragged forward a thin woman. Her faded blue dress was mud-stained, a grass sandal was missing, and the sole of her foot was raw and bloody. Daisy, she can't accept a settlement. She's dead. Her cracked lips trembled and tears carved channels down freckled cheeks. She'd just started her moon. My lord. Sir Prade lashed out, striking the escort and tearing a red line across his own face. The lowborn lies. I didn't kill her. Enough. Arthur rose. Sir Prade, you are guilty of rape and murder. I should castrate you and hang you. Since you plead drunkenness, let drink be your companion to the end. He turned to the guards. Give him wine. They forced a pouch to Prade's lips. The crowd cheered as he was dragged to the block, castrated, and then hanged. He lost consciousness after the gelding and came to as the rope took him. Mathis sighed. Perhaps we need not have made it so ugly. We could have given him the chance to take the black. Rowan's wife was a red wine. Mathis did hope for leniency. Arthur watched the rope tighten and said quietly, his influence is corrupting. Without a severe example to deter others, such things will keep happening. Our justice must be plain and swift. They continued through the list of more serious offenders until the sun leaned toward the horizon. Beside Sir Prady on the gallows would hang 4 Dornish brigands from Sandstone, men Arthur had passed on his way back from Sunspear, accused of repeated kidnapping and extortion that had left some dead. 2 Stormlanders who had assaulted women after refusing to pay for services were judged. They only admitted the truth when Arthur warned that lying would mean hanging. 2 Taroshi jugglers who set a shadow puppet stall on fire during a fire-breathing act, severely burning a man's arm and sparking a riot, met justice as well. When the trials ended and the crowd began to thin, Arthur rose and turned to the 2 lords at his side. Earl Mathis, Earl Franklin, would you do me the honor of joining me for dinner? There is business I would like to discuss. Dinner after the trials, the old falcon said, his gaze drifting from the gallows to Arthur. A small smile creased his wrinkled face. That will be flavorful. Mathis's eyes gleamed. He rose, smoothed the brocade embroidered with golden leaves, and said, It would be my pleasure, Sir Arthur. I'm quite fond of your amber peach wine. Illyria and Edric had gone falconing in the Violet Canyon with the visiting Riverland nobles, so only Arthur and the 2 earls sat in the castle's small dining room. Servants laid out honey-roasted capon, roasted lamb ribs seasoned with onions, carrots, and chili flakes, and warm buttered bread. Arthur raised his glass. My thanks, my lords, for presiding today. The old falcon lifted his cup. I am old and did not plan to compete in the tourney's mounted melees with younger men. I have time enough. He tasted the wine and sighed with pleasure. Truth be told, I prefer the business you mentioned, selling amber peach wine. Mathis set down his bread and wiped his mouth. Indeed. Tell us more. Arthur sliced a lamb rib. Pink juices pooled on his plate. He explained the plan he devised after finding little hope of partnering with Paxton Redwine and taking Maester Oswell's advice to involve lords from different regions as judges. He would have Peach Orchard residents handle brewing and production. In each region, an exclusive noble partner would handle transportation and sales. I'd like to invite you to be the exclusive partners for the Riverlands and Dorne, he said. You will be responsible for selling amber peach wine and our other brews within your regions. How will profits be split? The old falcon asked bluntly. Arthur refilled their cups and tapped the silver flagon. If this jug is priced at 100 silver stags, I will sell it to you at a 30% discount. 70 silver stags. The partner only needs to prepay half the value on the first order. The balance can be paid with the next purchase. So we buy at 70% and only pay half up front for the first order? Mathis repeated, voice bright. Is that true? The old falcon pressed. Words are wind until put to paper, Arthur said. We'll sign a contract. Let us draw it up now, the old falcon said. They began hashing out terms as they ate. Agency areas, minimum volumes, pricing policy, returns and exchanges, quality guarantees, and mutual obligations, maintaining the brand's image, Arthur guaranteeing product quality, the earls promising not to sell counterfeits or undercut each other, and strict payment schedules. Mathis and Franklin nodded as Arthur outlined steps for enforcement and penalties for breaches. They agreed on territories. House Fowler would represent Starfall City's House Fowler across the rest of Dorne, excluding the Greenblood River Basin. House Rowan would take the whole Riverlands. Mathis asked if Selwyn Tarth might serve as the Stormlands agent, and also expressed interest in representing the Westerlands himself. Arthur was cautious. "This is a pilot. We must test the model first. If we try to expand everywhere at once, problems will be hard to solve." Arthur had offered generous margins. He ceded a large portion of the profits not only to secure quick distribution for amber peach wine, but to bind powerful secondary nobles to his enterprise. Through these exclusive partnerships, he hoped to build influence across the Seven Kingdoms and prepare for whatever turmoil the future might bring. They argued clauses late into the night, the contract growing firmer with every clause, and when they finally set quill to parchment, they had the beginnings of a network, one that, if it held, could turn a small orchard's brew into something far bigger. Chapter 148, 70% Should Be Mine. The next morning, Old Falcon and Mattis went to the small council hall in the main keep and officially signed the cooperation agreement. Old Falcon flipped through the document Arthur had drafted and said, "Arthur, when I arrived, I heard you led the Mountain Regular Army to clear out most of the bandit and barbarian settlements in the hills and forests around Starfall City. At first, I didn't believe it. Traveling all the way from Skyreach City, I didn't even see half a suspicious person in the wilderness, let alone an organized effort to clear them out. But after seeing the Mountain Regular Army maintaining order at Xingyi Fort, I finally believed it." Mattis had already signed and was stamping the agreement with his personal seal. A hint of surprise crossed his face as he asked, "There really was something like that?" As a lord, he knew well how dangerous and difficult it is to root out bandits hidden in hills and forests. They're hard to find, the terrain is complex, and fighters usually either flee desperately or fight to the death. "If I were lucky, I'd like to see such a force," Mattis added. He kept one copy of the two agreements and handed the other to an attendant. "By the way, it was because of that wine that I visited your peach garden. It's hard to imagine Dorne's peach trees could bear such large fruits." Mattis Rowan and most of the Riverlands nobles had arrived at Starfall City by ship from Old Town, so they knew very little about the doings of the Mountain Regular Army. "They're responsible for keeping order during the tournament," Arthur answered. "You'll see them then." Arthur took the agreement back from the attendant and looked at the two signed, sealed copies in his hand. Though his face stayed impassive, the knot in his mind caused by Earl Paxton's offer of only 3/10 suddenly vanished. He felt an unexpected clarity. 7/10 should be mine, he thought. Old Falcon continued, "Arthur, since you've cleared the bandits along the way, can we build a road from Peach Garden to Prince's Pass to ease transportation?" The idea of building a road had been on Old Falcon's mind since yesterday. He liked the sales prospects for the amber peach wine and was keen on Arthur's proposed agency model. He reasoned that once the wine spread across the Seven Kingdoms, agents from other regions who wanted to bring it north from Starfall would have two main options: sea transport and land transport. Sea travel is faster but riskier and requires higher thresholds, seaworthy ships, trustworthy captains, or a familiar route, making it less stable and controllable than land routes. There are roughly 3 main roads heading north out of Dorne, via Bremon City, Prince's Pass, and the Stone Road. The Bremon Road runs through rugged mountains and lacks even a dirt road, so it's nearly impassable for merchant caravans. The Stone Road exists, but is winding and far from Starfall City, so Prince's Pass is by far the most convenient. Old Falcon saw that if Prince's Pass could be connected to Starfall City by a proper road, agents and merchants would prefer the land road, and he could collect tolls as goods passed through. Arthur was momentarily taken aback. He thought. This was an unexpected bonus. Arthur pretended hesitation. Building a road would require a lot of manpower and resources. Old Falcon pressed the point, reasoned patiently, and explained the pros and cons. After considerable discussion, Arthur agreed to cooperate in building the road. As the tournament drew near, Violet Canyon's Blacksmith District and the Blacksmith Guild became the busiest places for knights and warriors. Tournament performance often comes down to the quality of a knight's equipment. That morning, a large sign had been nailed to the guild's door with 4 bold characters: Trade in. Worried some knights might be illiterate, a blacksmith apprentice stood at the entrance and shouted to passersby. To help every participant show their skill in Starfall City's tournament, this guild is launching a trade-in event starting today. All knights signed up for the team tournament and the mounted tournament may trade in old chainmail, longswords, gorgets, pauldrons, and helmets for 1 gold dragon. At once, the knights and warriors lingering in the district to buy gear erupted. "You aren't trying to trick us, are you? The most ordinary chainmail here costs 15 gold dragons. Other equipment isn't cheap either. Are you really offering trade-ins?" The apprentice swore on the 7 gods' blacksmiths and shouted, "Everything I say is true. The blacksmith district is owned by Sir Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning's assets. This is an order from Lord Arthur. All we ask is that you register your information to confirm you're participating in the tournament." The deal drew particular interest from down-at-heel mercenary knights and wandering swordsmen. Once they understood the trade-in's value, their eyes lit up. Word spread quickly through the district. Most of those who came spent a single gold dragon to replace their battered chainmail. The chainmail they received was stamped with a snowflake mark, basic equipment from the blacksmith district, but far superior to what many had been wearing. Every knight who registered at the guild left beaming. The blacksmith guild steward, Carl By, looked over the booklet recording the detailed information of the trade-in knights and asked, "Arthur, will this really make our district famous?" "Perhaps," Arthur allowed. Carl turned the booklet in his hands and remembered Arthur's instructions. Making the blacksmith district famous was only part of the plan. The real aim was to collect the personal details of these knights for future recruitment. Arthur intended to form a standing knight corps, and the tournament was the perfect opportunity to gather information on wandering and mercenary knights. The trade-in system filtered them easily. Well-off knights and lords tended to retain proper armor bearing their crests and would naturally decline Arthur's offer. Arthur's recruitment wasn't limited to heavy cavalry. Skilled archers were also valuable, and they were within his scope of consideration. His positioning of the blacksmith district was deliberate. It wasn't primarily a profit center. With no large wars across the 7 kingdoms at present, demand for weapons was low. The district had largely produced agricultural implements, tools, and horseshoes, goods that improved production. Most weaponry made there would be sold internally to Starfall City, strengthening the city's martial spirit while reducing the cost of maintaining its armed forces. Chapter 149, Falconry. The pastures of Violet Canyon lay in a winding vale where lush watergrass rippled in green waves under the breeze. Men from the Stone Sheep tribe, hired by Arthur, drove herds of cattle and sheep, their rough shouts echoing off the canyon walls. In the distance, horse handlers were breaking sand war horses with glossy coats, and bundles of harvested pasture grass were piled into neat little hills, ready to be carried to Shingi Fort to be made into feed. At the center of the pasture stood the white church overseen by Bishop Alice, sunlight throwing colored patterns on the stone walls through its stained glass windows. A bustling settlement of 1,000 souls had grown up around the church. Smoke rose from thatched roofs as barbarians who had embraced the 7 gods bartered coarse cloth and goods with settlers from Starfall, while children chased one another through the mud. A falconry party, banners snapping in the wind and bearing a dozen different coats of arms, drew up outside the settlement to rest. Sir Bard checked his reins and raised a hand to halt the riders. He took off his helmet, wiped sweat from his brow, and called back to the nobles behind him. "Rest here for a quarter of an hour. We'll push on after that." The Riverlands nobles dismounted, one by one, to stretch. Several young ladies in finery clustered together, excitedly taking in the view. "Red Mountain isn't as dangerous as they say." A girl with a pearl hairnet lifted her veil and pointed toward the distant peaks. "Besides the high crags and the heat, it's as pretty as the Riverlands." "Alora, remember?" Another girl with golden braids giggled. "The nuns used to frighten us with tales of Red Mountain barbarians, that they'd snatch us away if we weren't obedient. But those barbarians we met all worship the 7 gods like us. They look like ordinary folk. Look at those wheat fields and orchards, a third girl said, standing on tiptoe. You don't see so many herds of cattle, sheep, and horses back home. The most surprising thing is the church, the first girl added. It actually has glass panes made in myrrh. You don't see such expensive decoration even in the Riverlands. Edric sat quietly on his horse, listening to their chatter, fingers idly stroking his reins. These Riverlands misses were all cousins or companions of Margary, who rode with his aunt Illyria ahead. Alora Tyrell had introduced them with a half smile and a double meaning, roses on lower branches, but to Edric they were as boring as Desmera, Arthur's red-haired daughter. They cared nothing for spears or swordplay and would scream if a horse went too fast. Ed, Alora started, but a sudden, piercing cry split the air and cut her off. Edric looked up, his face breaking into a grin. Sharp Wing unfolded huge black wings and swooped low, talons locked around a struggling elk. The surrounding knights sprang into action, steadying skittish horses. Sir Bard rode over, his armor glinting. Ed, he said, frowning, bring that eagle back to its cage. Don't cause a commotion before we reach the hunting grounds. Edric moped, then took the bone whistle from his neck and blew it. Sharp Wing circled once and settled on the cage atop the accompanying carriage, tearing into its prey. Blood trickled down the carriage rail, and several of the misses went pale and edged away. Edric glanced at the roses hiding behind their guards and felt a pang of missing Ilia and the sand snakes. They would have swarmed around Sharp Wing, eager to stroke its feathers. At least his ears were quiet now. A trained eagle of Sir Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning? A deep female voice said behind him. Edric turned. The speaker was a woman as tall and broad as his cousin. He had almost taken her for a knight. Her face was wide and freckled, her nose bearing the map of old brakes, her thick lips heavy and blunt, and her straw-colored hair dry and coarse. But her blue eyes were clear and direct, bluntly honest in a way the noble misses were not. She was far less pretty than the Tyrells, but Edric had no doubt she could have flattened a dozen of the roses in a scrap. I'm Brienne of Tarth, she said politely. Edric pointed to Sharp Wing. Are you not afraid of it, Miss Brienne? Knights swear not to harm the innocent, Brienne replied, watching the giant eagle with calm attention. The Sword of the Morning has been the most celebrated knight in the Seven Kingdoms. I don't believe Sir Arthur would let an untamed raptor harm people. Edric's eyes brightened. Her plain talk showed more sense than the girl's chatter. He noticed the scar on her nose. You fight well, I suppose? Are you here for the tournament? No, Brienne said a little awkwardly. I came with my father on other business. On the road to the Red Mountain hunting grounds, Edric and Brienne fell into easy conversation. He told her, with growing excitement and wild gestures, how his cousin Arthur, the mysterious knight, had twice bested Prince Oberyn at the Sunspear tourney, defending the champion's honor with 20 wins. You're so tall, Edric urged. You should enter the Starfall tournament as a mysterious knight. Like Obara Sand, she fought as a woman and beat strong men to stay champion. Brienne hesitated, touched by the thought. I didn't bring armor or the things I'd need. Leave it to me, Edric patted his chest. Weapons, gear, attendance. I'll see you registered. About half an hour later, the falconry party reached the hunting grounds. The land rose sharply here, steep rock faces draped in dense trees, perfect for birds of prey. A newly built hunting tower clung midway up the mountain, with sentries able to overlook the whole area. Stone steps spiraled down to a row of log hunting huts at the mountain's foot, ringed with kennels, bird cages, stables, and other facilities. Sir Bard sounded a horn, and the nobles released their trained falcons. Edric waited until everyone else's birds had gone, and then blew his bone whistle. Sharp Wing spread its vast wings and rose like a dark cloud, vanishing toward the red rock slopes. Once the eagle had gone, the Tyrell girls gathered again around him. Alora tilted her head, curious. What were you talking about? You looked so happy. Edric deliberately brought up subjects the misses cared little for. Swordplay, lances, knightly honor, and war. You wouldn't understand. I do understand war, Alora protested, at first puzzled, then her eyes gleamed with naive excitement. I'll give my champion a token. The nuns say tokens make champions brave and fearless on the field. They'll charge and shout my name as they kill enemies. Won't that be glorious? I'll have mine kill 100, Mage interrupted. Yalan clasped her hands and sighed dreamily. Then the poets will write victory songs, like the hammer and the anvil, for ages. Edric pressed his fingers to his forehead. They were hopelessly romantic and hopelessly ignorant. Brienne's voice dropped low in his ear. On the battlefield, a single instant can mean everything. My swordmaster once told me of a friend, strong, quick, a hero on the training ground. Everyone expected him to become a great knight. In a fight in the stepstones, he felled his opponent and the man's axe slipped free. He hesitated for a moment, and in that moment his foe drew a dagger and found a gap in his armor. She turned to Edric. All his strength and skill meant nothing then. Everything came down to that moment. He flinched instead of striking the killing blow. As the tournament drew near, Arthur poured every ounce of his energy into preparing. This was his first formal appearance since earning the title Sword of the Morning. The stakes went far beyond pride. It was his chance to prove his strength to all of Dorne and perhaps to the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. He had to win. There was no margin for error. He moved his household from Starfall City to the tournament camp so he could train without interruption. At the first touch of dawn over the Red Mountains, he was already on the jousting field, charging with his lance again and again, correcting his seat, learning the feel of the ground. In quieter moments, he watched the other knights at practice, noting their habits and weaknesses while reflecting on his own faults. With the broad strokes of Starfall's affairs settled, Arthur delegated the rest. The old instructor would oversee the high-platform trials in his stead. Sir Barton and the captain of the guard would keep order in the city. Pete took charge of the Peach Garden Agency negotiations after Count Selwyn Tarth rushed back to sign the Stormlands contract. Sir William, acting Lord of Knight's Rest Keep, was entrusted with the road linking Lighthouse Keep to Prince's Pass, assisted by the administrator, a maester, and the builder Quentin from Jingyi Fort. Arthur authorized Administrator Fat Karen to leverage weapons and gear from the blacksmith district, and, using the roster of available and down-on-their-luck knights that Carl By had compiled, to recruit as many as possible. On the newly widened tilt yard, knights were settling into the feel of the turf. How does it fit? Is this vine armor comfortable? Arthur asked as he and Sir Damon Sand rode a circuit and then checked the dust marks where cork-tipped lances had struck. I promised you this back in Sunspear, Damon said, taking off his helm and shaking sweat-dark hair from his forehead. He grinned. Light, breathable. Now I see how you beat Prince Oberyn. He handed the reins to his groom and walked beside Arthur toward the shade. Mind you, this is a knockout tournament. With that vine harness, you'll need to be careful when you face me. Don't give me an opening. I always give my all, Arthur said, setting his helm on the long table and taking a bite of a plump peach. Juice ran down his beard. He wiped it away and teased. Seriously, in the Sunspear final, did you let your father, Sir Roger Illyrian, best you so he could take the champion's seat? Damon gulped water, shook his head, and smiled wryly. What could I do? He's my father. Around them, the rest area was laid with long tables bearing water, peaches, blood oranges, and biscuits. Arthur had placed Riverlands and Dornish knights' tents on opposite sides of the field to limit contact before the lists were called. Better to avoid trouble than indulge it. You won 20 matches at Sunspear, Damon went on. But some say your father kept the champion's place and won the beauty too. Miss Ellenwood is fair and well-born, a good match. After your houses intermarry, will God's grace and you both turn to Prince Quentin? My grandmother decides God's grace, Damon said with a bitter smile. As for me, Ariane asked me to send you her regards. The reference brought a chuckle from Arthur. It seemed Damon was not soon to escape her influence. They trained until the sun turned the turf hot, then rested through the worst of the day. In the afternoon, Arthur returned to the stands and watched other knights practice, cataloging habits in his head. Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, habitually lowered his lance slightly before charging and corrected only at the last moment, a gambit that could rob an unsteady charger of speed. Smiling Baelor liked to feint at the last second, hiding his true intent. Arthur wondered if the tale of Fartwind, Baelor from Oberyn's stories, owed itself to such tricks. Ser Ulrich Uller charged like a man possessed, all force and fury. Half the Ullers seemed mad, and the other half worse. Arthur paid closest attention to the Count of Blackhaven, Lord Beric Dondarrion, the Lightning Lord. Golden red hair, a black satin cloak covered with star patterns, a black destrier, bolts of lightning on his breastplate, shield and helm. He rode a clean, exact line and had the truest sense of chivalry Arthur had seen. He'd rather judge before he condemned, would not kill the innocent, and would see a vow kept. Beric had just unseated a Stormlands knight in practice, shouting, "I'm here to take the championship." A little flamboyant, Arthur thought, but earnest enough. Arthur trained, observed, and refined until 2 days before the lists were called, when a herald entered his tent with a rolled parchment. "Sir Arthur, registration for all tourney events is closed. There are 354 knights in the mounted lance tilt," the herald announced, handing the list over. Arthur's gaze skimmed until he found his first opponent. Sir John Fossaway of New Barrel, the green apple of the Riverlands. He'd seen the man practicing, well outfitted but awkward in the saddle. Arthur frowned and thought ahead, already calculating possible second-round matches. 354, he murmured. "How long will this take?" "Given the ground's size, at least 5 days," the herald replied, excitement plain in his voice. "More if the matches are close. It will be a tourney like no other." "Announce the lists," Arthur said, and the herald withdrew. The tent flap blew open, and in walked Illyria, her skirts catching blades of grass, scented wind following her. Margaery Tyrell came behind her, composed and smiling. "Aunt Miss Margaery," Arthur greeted. "Back from hawking? Who had the best catch?" Illyria tossed her gloves on the table. "Other people's hawks return with ducks, herons, rabbits, squirrels, nothing worth shouting about. Sharp Wing dragged a wild boar home the size of a pig. How can you compare?" Margaery gave a soft laugh, her eyes clear and admiring. "Lord Willis's gerfalcons are second to none in the Riverlands. I did not expect Sir's Sharp Wing to outdo them." Arthur looked around the tent. "Where's Ed?" he asked. "That child," Illyria said with a sigh. "He says he's found a knight to serve and went to the blacksmith district to equip himself for service." "Which knight?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Brienne of Tarth," Illyria replied, with emphasis on daughter. "Count Selwyn's daughter." "Oh," Arthur said, unconcerned, and returned to the parchment. Illyria's eyes widened. "That's your only reaction? Aren't you surprised?" "We're amid a tourney," Arthur said without looking up. "Knights are sweating on the field for honor. Who has time for hunting? If Ed insists, I'll respect his decision." "He's a child," Illyria fumed, stamping her foot. "And she isn't even a true knight, a woman." She turned to Margaery. "I want him to go to Highgarden. Miss Margaery promised he could be Lord Mace's squire." Margaery's voice was earnest. "Highgarden has the best instructors and companions Ed's age. My father would provide." "Thank you," Arthur interrupted politely but firmly, rising. "No offense, Miss Margaery, but I've never met Lord Mace. I won't entrust Ed's upbringing to a man I do not know, even if he is warden of the Riverlands. Let us ask Maester Oswell first." Illyria stamped off in a huff, the tent flap rattling behind her. Margaery lingered a moment, then approached more calmly. "Since you won't let Ed go to Highgarden," she said softly, "how would you feel about him being my brother Loras's squire?" "You must have met Loras?" Arthur asked. "The Knight of Flowers?" he said. "Handsome, good with the lance." Margaery's eyes shone with intention, but Arthur leaned forward, impatience sharp in his purple gaze. "Miss Margaery, I appreciate the offer, but your cousins have been courting Ed, and now you've stirred Illyria to persuade him away from home. What does House Tyrell want in return?" Margaery recovered her composure. "House Tyrell seeks cooperation for your amber peach wine." Arthur steepled his fingers. "You've likely heard. I've already signed a regional agreement in the Riverlands with Lord Mathis Rowan. That cannot be altered." "And the Crownlands?" she asked smoothly. Arthur studied the pleasant rose before him, gentle in look, sharp in eye. Cooperation wasn't a marriage. Fit and mutual interest mattered more than rank. Fowler, Rowan, and Tarth were close enough in scale. Highgarden was different entirely. Their appetite was larger than the amber peach wine's likely profits. He didn't want to be devoured. "I don't plan to expand regional agencies at this stage," he said slowly. "If you truly care for the amber peach wine, speak to House Redwine. Ask them to open their golden wine agency to you, or if you like, I'll send 7 barrels as a gesture." Marguerite rose and curtsied. "Thank you for your courtesy, sir." She paused at the tent flap and then said lightly, "Those 7 barrels won't be necessary." After she left, Arthur closed his eyes and slid his mind outward, shifting to Sharpwing's vantage as he sometimes did. From that high, drifting point of view, he saw Illyria beside the river, angry, tossing stones with her guards sent away. He was about to go to her when a figure cut across the field, golden-red hair flashing in the late sun. Fate, he thought, wonderful beyond words. Chapter 151, Starfall City Martial Arts Tournament, 2-in-1. Before dawn had fully broken, the flagstone road to the tourney grounds was already clogged with people. Farmers tightened the brims of battered hats with rough hands. A rosy-cheeked boy sat on his father's shoulders, waving a wooden sword and shrieking with excitement. A fisherman, smelling of salt and fish, gestured wildly as he boasted of ships he'd seen belonging to noble lords. Merchants pushed creaking carts, the smell of fresh bread mingling with morning mist and drawing shabby children who chased one another through the crowd. Women with baskets clustered around a bread seller, haggling whether the loaves had too much sawdust and arguing loudly about which knight had the better chance of winning. The moment one of them mentioned the sword of the morning, the argument fell silent. That, it seemed, needed no debate. Inside the tent camp outside the grounds, Arthur woke before most. He sat quietly in his undershirt and breeches, eyes closed to save energy. Morning light filtered through gaps in the canvas, splashing bits of sun over his chiseled face. Purple Post's familiar neigh drifted in from outside, full of barely concealed excitement. Arthur opened his violet eyes as Vicwood and Zack lifted the tent flap and strode in. "Arthur, there are so many people outside the grounds," Vicwood said, breathless with excitement. "I swear everyone from Torrent River is here. They've come to see the sword of the morning win." Arthur stretched, his bones cracked faintly. A confident smile touched his mouth. "Arm me," he said. "Yes, sir." Vicwood and Zack set about with practiced speed. They brought out his vine-worked cuirass, gorget, greaves, pauldrons, gauntlets, helmet, and spurs, checking every strap and buckle 3 times as was their custom. When at last they secured the last strap, Zack couldn't help but grin. "Arthur will shine like the morning star today," he said. Arthur took up his heart-shaped shield, stamped with his personal sigil, and stepped outside. Purple Post pranced, paws pawing the earth and emitting low whinnies. The horse leaned its muzzle against Arthur's shoulder. Arthur stroked its neck to steady it. Other tents spilled forth knights in their finery. Family colors and banners flew from saddles and caparisons. Loras Tyrell's display was the most showy. Enameled armor patterned with 1,000 flowers and a snow-white steed draped in red and white roses that glittered in the early light. Arthur watched with a faint, private amusement, then swung into his saddle and nudged Purple Post into motion. The tourney grounds were ringed by a dense, immovable throng. The Starfall City guards worked hard to cut a path for the knights. The lists were banked with fences and shaded for commoners on the east and west. The north and south sides held 2-tiered grandstands for nobility and knights, banners streaming from the high platforms. At the sound of the horn, gates opened. 14 knights, Arthur among them, rode into the arena and gathered in a corner. A herald on the high platform began calling names. Knights answered in pairs, circling to salute the crowd. Some lowered visors to accept favors from the ladies. Finally, the herald's voice rang out. "Sir Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning, will face Sir John Fossaway of New Barrel City." The name drew a wave of sound from the stands. Arthur rode the circuit. The banners of noble houses, roses, grapevines, towers, red and green apples, golden trees, falcons, lightning, flashing past. He halted before the Dane family's shooting star longsword hanging from the platform. On the high dais, Illyria had smoothed away her earlier anger and tied a ribbon to the point of Arthur's lance as a token of blessing. "Arthur," she called, "for Starfall City." Edric beside her gave a sheepish wave. Arthur returned the smile, closed his visor, and rode to the lists. The 14 knights faced one another in order. At the horn they lowered lances. The horses thundered forward. Purple Post launched in a charge that put him half a body ahead of the others. Arthur kept his eyes on John Fossaway's green apple device. The impact was thunderous. Arthur's wooden lance slammed into the iron-bound shield bearing the green apple and sent Jon skidding and rolling. A roar went up from the crowd. Arthur eased his mount, watched Jon struggle to his feet, wide-eyed and limping, and then reined in. "Sir Arthur, you have a fine horse," Loras Tyrell said from the side of the lists. Arthur lifted his visor. "And I have a good sword," he replied. He rode a quick circuit, acknowledged the cheering, and flung his broken lance to a delighted boy. Loras, meanwhile, removed his helmet, plucked a white rose from the carpet, and tossed it to a fair young lady. Arthur returned to his tent to rest for 2 hours. Jon Fossaway himself came by, paying the ransom for his horse and armor, and grinning despite the loss. "An honor to have faced the sword of the morning," he said. In the afternoon, Arthur faced Sir Edwy Fossaway, the red apple of Cider Hall. The ripe red apple did him little better than the green. Edwy lasted 1 round longer than his kinsman. Half an hour after accepting the red apple's ransom, Arthur learned of his third and last opponent for the day. A free knight from the Crabclaw Peninsula in the Vale, Rosso Brent. Arthur snorted softly. Today seemed an apple special. Rosso Brent, though not much known now, had fought bravely at the Battle of the Blackwater and earned a fearsome nickname. Arthur had never seen him practice in the lists and didn't know his manner. But the man's equipment told a story. Mismatched, dented plates, a shield scarred and uneven, chainmail stamped with the snowflake mark of the blacksmith district. His gorget sagged a little, as if ill-fitted. At the sound of the horn, both horses plunged forward. Arthur drew level and noticed that Rosso Brent's gorget rode high on its first pass, leaving half his throat exposed. Arthur's eyes narrowed. A lance to the throat would have been deadly. Splinters could have severed the windpipe. He chose not to exploit it. He aimed for the upper edge of the helmet. His lance struck true and knocked Rosso's bucket helmet flying. The lance did not even break. Rosso's blow struck Arthur's right shoulder, but Arthur rode through it, legs squeezed against his mount to absorb the shock. He expected Rosso to yield after losing his helm. Instead, the man held on. Up close, Arthur saw a square jaw, flat nose, cropped gray hair, an ordinary face but with resolute eyes. "You are brave," Arthur said as they passed. Rosso gave a wry smile. "Not brave, sir. Poor." Arthur spared Rosso's throat in subsequent passes. He broke lances against him, and only after the 4th broken lance did Rosso finally go down. By then, blood stained his brow, temple, and cheek from flying splinters, and it trickled into his ill-fitted gorget. The crowd rose as one, cheering not only for his tenacity, but for Arthur's restraint, mercy, and victory. Arthur tossed the final broken lance to Zack. "Send for the master," he told Vickwood. "See to him." Vickwood muttered as he hurried off. "Not brave. Foolish. If Arthur had not held back, he'd be dead." Arthur took off his armor in his tent and changed into a Dornish silk robe before returning to the high platform. Vickwood met him there. "The Maester says Rosso Brent isn't mortally wounded," he reported. "He'll recover in a few days, but the scar will remain." Arthur nodded and took the Starfall City seats in the center of the high platform, best view of the lists. He glanced for Edric and found the young squire missing. "Where did Ed go?" Arthur asked Illyria, who sat beside him. She only pointed briefly toward the lists. Arthur followed her finger. On the far end, Edric stood with a lance, eyes flicking nervously about. "It should be the 3rd round now, right?" Arthur asked, watching a tall knight in fine smith's gear ride. "It seems the mysterious knight Ed chose isn't bad," Illyria murmured, still watching the joust. Arthur grinned. "Ed is making a good squire." Illyria kept silent, but when Arthur abruptly pointed, she blushed and playfully smacked his shoulder. "Count Beric Dondarrion is entering," he announced. Illyria's cheeks flared. She cast about in a panic. Arthur couldn't help but laugh. "When did you?" "That night when you were angry," Arthur teased. "I saw you by the river." Illyria snorted and turned away. But below the platform, Beric Dondarrion, armor bright with lightning sigils, raised his lance toward Illyria and bowed, calling, "Fair lady, grant me your blessing, and I shall be invincible." Illyria straightened, flushed and delighted. "May the 7 bless you, sir," she said, rising to press a kiss to the point of his lance. Whether it was luck or charm, Beric cut through his opponent with a single clean strike and unseated him. Elsewhere, Brienne, disguised as the mysterious knight, broke her 5th lance and then dismounted to defeat her strong foe, Sir Ulrich Uller, in a hard foot fight with a longsword. When the day's tourney ended, the camp filled with the exhausted, the elated, and those nursing bruises. Back at his tent, Arthur found Rosso Brent waiting outside, his face bound in bandages and his warhorse saddled. "Sir Arthur," Rosso said, stroking the horse's neck, "this is my horse and gear. I have no coin to ransom them. They're yours. Thank you for your mercy in the lists. You are a true knight, the sword of the morning." Arthur regarded him for a moment. "Rosso Brent, would you serve me? Starfall City needs brave men." Rosso's dull eyes brightened. He fell to one knee, blood soaking the edge of his bandage. "It is my honor, Sir Arthur." After seeing Rosso Brun, nicknamed the Apple Eater, off to Starpost Fort to recuperate, Arthur patted his shoulder and watched the stubborn man leave with his attendants. Then he walked over to his horse, which was grazing. The animal lifted its head and neighed as he approached, a white mist from its nostrils. Arthur rubbed its mane, told the groom to take good care of it, and stepped back into his tent. Jimmy Sunderland was inside, carefully polishing his armor with an oiled cloth. When Arthur lifted the curtain, Jimmy held up the left shoulder plate for him to see. In the candlelight, the dent showed plainly on the metal. "Lord, today's joust was something, wasn't it?" Jimmy grinned. "Your shoulder's taken a hit. This'll need the smithy." Vickwood followed Arthur in and added, "Lord met a lucky fool today." He then recounted what had happened to Rosso Brun in the jousting ring. "You mean that free rider from the Fingers Peninsula outside the tent?" Jimmy raised an eyebrow as he wiped his greaves. "I saw he was hurt and invited him in to rest, but he refused, insisted he'd wait outside until you returned." "Typical," Arthur said dryly. "People from the Fingers are as stubborn as the rocks and sheep dung on their islands." He took the shoulder plate, turned it in the light, and studied the dent. It was the mark left by Rosso Brun's first lance. "Take this to the camp smithy," he told Vickwood, "and find Fat Karen. Bring him to me." When Vickwood left, Arthur turned to Jimmy. "How did you do in the archery rounds today?" Jimmy hung the cleaned vine armor back on its rack. "I passed the preliminaries. The finals tomorrow. Lord, if I place, you promise to knight me with Dawn." Arthur cocked an eyebrow. "If you win the whole championship, I'll knight you with Dawn." Jimmy blinked. "You said if I placed before." Arthur smiled faintly. He'd seen Jimmy practice. The man deserved a spurs. Still, Arthur wanted to push him. "I'm saying the championship. Without a worthy opponent, victory won't help you improve." Jimmy's jaw set. There was an archer in the prelims who was uncommon, angry from the reach. His arrows seemed to never miss. "That's the kind I want you to face." Arthur patted Jimmy's shoulder. "If you've no rival, you won't grow. I want you to win for yourself, not just for my promise." Jimmy took a deep breath, fighting spirit lighting his face. "I'll win, Lord. I'll show you." A guard lifted the tent flap. The camp cook came in carrying a pot of creamy crucian carp soup, the smell filling the tent. Zach followed with a tray of black bread and purple olives and a large iron fork skewering half a roasted lamb, sizzling and spiced. Arthur gestured to the men to join him. He hollowed a piece of black bread with his knife, ladled soup into it, and began to eat. Fat Karen appeared, drawn by the scent, his belt straining. Arthur took the carved lamb leg Zach offered. "How goes recruitment of the mercenary knights?" he asked. Karen sipped soup from his bread bowl and mumbled through a mouthful. 3 rounds of jousting yesterday knocked out over 200 men. We've contacted more than 100 mercenaries and reached preliminary agreements. You can screen them yourself after the tournament." The team melee with over 200 fighters had 3 deaths, a dozen plus broken arms and legs, and over a dozen broken ribs before a winner was decided, he added, wiping grease from his lips. "The champion is a Shadow Mountain barbarian named Kara from Red Mountain." Arthur tried to place the tribe. "Shadow Mountain? Near Starfall City?" Karen shook his head. "No, Lord. I asked Sir Bard about him. His barbarian soldiers said Shadow Mountain folk usually operate near Bremon and Prince's Pass. They worship shadow cats. This Kara refused to join us. He took the 7,000 gold dragon's prize and left?" Arthur grinned. "Old habits die hard. If you're suddenly rich, you don't want to wear someone else's colors." He thought for a moment. "The archers knocked out today. Try to keep them. Let Jimmy pick the ones we should recruit." "Me?" Jimmy seemed surprised, then nodded. "Understood, Lord." Karen asked about the musicians and bards for the poetry and music contests. Arthur shook his head. No need. Give the eliminated musicians a coin and send them on. Bards spread fame. Keeping them won't do much. Pay them well enough to sing kindly of Starfall. The poetry and music contests would be held in Starfall after the jousting. Next morning, after yesterday's eliminations, more than 60 riders remained. The matches moved from multiple simultaneous pairings to single duels. The track had been cleaned, the sawdust swept, the mud packed hard. Arthur was set to compete early, his fourth-round opponent a somewhat notorious jouster, Sir Garland Hightower of Greyeiron from the Riverlands. He was the younger brother of Smiling Baelor and the second son of Count Leighton Hightower of Oldtown. Baelor had been unhorsed and sprained his ankle the day before, but was expected to recover. As Arthur rode the tilt to greet the crowd, Garland stayed near, not seeking the lady's favors, but shouting insults instead. Arthur wasn't sure if Garland's anger came from family pride after his brother's fall, or if he hoped to provoke Arthur into a mistake. Arthur didn't dignify the bait with a response. "Snow, pray to whatever trees you fancy," Garland spat. "You won't have time after I knock you off." Arthur flicked a look of disdain. "Your behavior shames the Hightower name." He then took his place and watched Garland across the field. The Hightower wore a full suit of heavy gray plate, a white burning tower emblazoned on his chest. The armor's plates met tightly. He looked like an iron can on horseback. At the sight of the flaming tower, Arthur's plan came to him in one outrageous phrase: slow cook. When the horn sounded, Arthur abandoned his usual swift, aggressive style and adopted a defensive one. He would not beat Garland with a single thunderous strike. He would let the Dornish sun do the rest. Using nimble horsemanship, Arthur dodged and parried, making the duels stretch on. He took care to angle his lance so it splintered and to show near falls, giving Garland the illusion of dominance while draining his vigor. Round after round went by. Garland at first thought Arthur a weak showman, but the boy kept riding despite heavy hits. As the minutes stretched, Garland began to feel the heat crawling under his armor. Sweat soaked his padding. The metal trapped the sun's heat. Still he pushed himself. Defeating the Sword of the Morning would bring him immortal songs. Arthur kept the pace. The crowd roared as the two broke lances after lances, the match becoming an exhausting spectacle. By the 16th round, Arthur, in his lighter vine armor, was sweating through his jerkin and padding. He, too, felt the strain. He wondered if this man had been forged for heat itself. Just as Arthur prepared to shift tactics, a gasp rose from the high platform. Garland had tumbled from his horse a short way off and lay sprawled on his back, unmoving. Attendants rushed in, hands fumbled to pull his helm and mail, and then they jerked back. "It's so hot," one cried. Steam roiled from the plates like smoke from a roasting beast. Arthur restrained a laugh that nearly burst his visor into a grin. "Water! Get him water and pull him into the shade." Smiling Baelor hopped anxiously on his one good leg and urged the men on. Buckets were poured over the armor. Clouds of steam rose. When the chaos died down, Arthur rode around the field and bowed, solemn beneath the Hightower banner. "Sir Garland rode with great courage," he proclaimed to the nobles. "It was not I who bested him, but the son of Dorne. I will send my maester to tend him. If he is able, I will honor him with another match." Riverland's lords nodded at Arthur's courtesy. From the Tyrell seats, the ladies and their kin watched with bright eyes. Margaery, already taken with Arthur's conduct these past days, looked at him with admiration. After learning he had no further opponents that day, Arthur changed and went to the first aid room to check on Garland. The Hightower lay stripped to the waist on a cot, two attendants fanning him while Baelor splashed water over him like someone trying to cool a roast. Maester Ewan worked with a mortar, crushing herbs and mixing a bitter potion. "Maester, how is Sir Garland?" Arthur asked, forcing a smile. "You must save him." Maester Ewan sighed. "Sir Garland is in a deep stupor from severe heat stroke. He has a strong constitution and iron will, otherwise he would have collapsed long before. I am preparing a remedy. When he will wake is the Seven's business." Baelor, suddenly no longer smiling, pleaded, "When will my brother wake?" Arthur watched them, the question of whether to demand ransom for the man's armor and steed crossing his mind and lingering there like an unspoken choice. Chapter 153, Shieldbreaker. 2-in-1. After comforting Garce Hightower, Arthur made his way toward the high platform seats to watch the remaining nightly tilts and study potential opponents. Illyria tilted her head as he approached, her pale gold hair catching the sunlight. "How is Sir Garce?" she asked. Doing all right," Arthur replied automatically. He cleared his throat and straightened. "The maester says he had heat stroke and fainted. May the Seven bless him with a quick recovery." Illyria blinked, a playful glint at the corner of her mouth. "Thanks to Dornish weather, or else I'd have thought you couldn't beat him." Arthur studied her expression and felt pleased. His acting had been convincing. He lifted the ribbon tied to his arm. "How could that be? I have your token's blessing. I'm fearless in battle. I cannot be defeated." Illyria shook her head, watching the lists. If your token could make someone unbeatable, Count Barry wouldn't have been thrown. Arthur followed her gaze to the lists, where 2 knights charged and their lances shattered, wood flying. "I missed a good match," he said with interest. "Who threw Count Barry?" "That mysterious knight Ed serves." "Brienne," Illyria sighed. Arthur couldn't help laughing at the idea. "Auntie, it seems Ed has better taste than you." Illyria didn't argue. Arthur noticed she no longer seemed opposed to Ed serving Brienne as her squire. Around them, the clash of lances and the neighing of horses wove through the arena as one knight after another, their banners like a turning lantern, put on a fierce show. Time slipped by, and the day's events were drawing to a close. Arthur watched intently. 3 fights, especially, held his attention. The first was Loras Tyrell against Count Quinn Roxton. They broke 8 lances between them. On the 9th, Loras used a small trick and narrowly prevailed. Count Roxton's lands, Old Hill, lay beyond the Red Mountain from Starfall City. Cross the Red Mountain from Violet Canyon, and you come to Old Hill in the Riverlands. House Roxton had once owned a Valyrian steel sword called Orphan Maker, long since lost. The second contest was Daemon Sand versus Gerald Dane. In the 4th round, their lances struck at the same moment, and both nearly came off their saddles. On foot, Gerald Dane's swordplay carried the day. The third was Sir Desmond Redwine against Sir Vane, a sworn sword of Starfall. In a single pass, Desmond's lance struck the modified visored helm so true that it knocked Sir Vane from his horse and left him unconscious. Sir Desmond was Lord Paxter's cousin and the captain of the Arbor flagship Light of the Arbor. He was also master-at-arms of the Arbor's yard. At the tourney first aid tent, Arthur stood by the cot where Sir Vane lay with his right cheek badly swollen. The maester was gently cleaning the wound. On a wooden tray nearby lay 7 bloody teeth. "How is he?" Arthur asked softly. "His jaw is dislocated, and he's lost 7 teeth. Fortunately, none lodged in his windpipe." The maester wiped sweat from his brow. "I cleaned him and gave him milk of the poppy. If he wakes, he'll probably only be able to chew on the left side for a while." "Take good care of him," Arthur said. Then he turned to Sir Vane's wife and children. "If you need anything, come to Starfall and find me." They thanked him, tearful and relieved, and he left the tent. He wasn't surprised by the injuries. Even armored flesh can break. In a tilt, you can't blame a man for doing what it takes to win. High speed, low visibility, and the small area of a head make head strikes hard, but when they land, even a pine lance can fell a man. Arthur hadn't expected the Redwine of the Arbor to field such a deadly lancer. He wondered, half to himself, whether Desmond was a balding man. The old jest that bald men grew stronger gave him a private smile. Back at his camp, a crowd waited at his tent. "Lord, Sir Jimmy Sunderland won the archery," Vic Wood called, before Arthur could close the flap. Jimmy stepped forward with a lanky, freckled, red-haired youth at his side. Angry. "My lord, I did not fail in my duty," Jimmy said in a low voice. "Well done," Arthur said, slapping Jimmy on the shoulder. "After the tourney, when you keep vigil in the sept at Starfall, I'll fulfill my promise and knight you at dawn." He thought of the boy he'd met years before, dreaming of the Kingsguard in a white robe with a red stripe, and felt a light, proud relief at how steady and capable Jimmy had become. Jimmy, who had taken the 4,000 gold dragon prize, was soon urged by squires he knew to go carousing in the tavern at Starpost Fort. Arthur didn't stop them. He had a tilt the next day and had to be ready. Morning came. As Arthur pulled on his armor, only one of his 4 squires had arrived on time. "Didn't you drink?" he asked. "I drank," Zach admitted, scratching his head. I drank with them, then they all fell under the tables. Arthur tied his gauntlets, amused. I didn't know you could outdrink a barrel. I didn't drink cups, Zack said with a grin. I hugged a barrel of amber peach wine and drank the whole thing. Not 1,000 cups. I'm 1 barrel tolerant. The lists thinned as the day went on, while the stands swelled. Arthur's opponent in the 5th round was Sir Desmond Redwine. Desmond was not tall. Through his open-faced helm, Arthur saw a freckled nose and cheeks, but couldn't tell about the hair. As they rode their ceremonial circle, Desmond closed and spat. Boy, Sir Pred, the squire you hung in the square was mine. Today my lance will aim not at your head, but at your eyes. Before Arthur could reply, Desmond dropped his visor and urged his horse forward in a furious charge. Riverlanders loved trash talk before a bout, but what Desmond said revealed his plan. The trumpets sounded. Purple Post, Arthur's mount, moved like a strike of purple lightning. Arthur couched his lance and watched Desmond's position. Desmond held his lance very low and never raised it. When the horses met, wood splintered. Desmond's tip rode along Arthur's heart-shaped shield and slammed into his chest. The impact shook Arthur through and through. If not for gripping his horse with his legs and the force-absorbing vine armor, he might have been unhorsed. His own lance, aimed to counter the eye feint, struck the grapevine shield and broke. Anger and a colder fear washed through Arthur. Desmond's trick had nearly sent him rolling in the dirt. He circled back to the lists and threw away the shattered lance with a shout. Desmond, surprised to see Arthur still in the saddle after such a full-force blow, realized he had misjudged him. He had watched this Sword of the Morning closely at Garce Hightower's match and that reckless rider Rosso Brunn. How skillful and steady Arthur's horsemanship, reactions, and lancing were. Arthur had seemed to treat the tourney as a game. Desmond had planned a setup to beat an arrogant boy with a single brutal strike. It had almost worked. Now Desmond's face set. It would be a test of strength. The trumpets blew again. Desmond leveled his lance and rode fast. Arthur rode purple toward him, lance held true and even. Desmond braced his shield where he thought the strike would fall and lunged for Arthur's chest again. His lance struck the shield, except this time the shaft did not merely snap against the packing. The long pine shaft of a tourney lance passed through the prepared grapevine shield as if it were a war lance, and a raw force ran through Desmond's body. He was hurled backward like a man launched and knocked senseless. Arthur watched Desmond land in a cloud of dust and felt a strange calm. He thought, not without amusement, that he had used a burst of force, what some would call a kill, and if that counted as cheating, then so be it. Whatever the word, the result was clear. Desmond was down. Silence held for 3 long minutes before Lord Paxter broke it with shouts. He broke the rules. He used a war lance. How could a pine lance pierce a shield? Herald, inspect the lance. Arthur was cooperative. He sat on Purple Post and tossed the broken lance to the herald and the gathered knights. Loras Tyrell took it and ran his hand along the shaft. One section near the tip had splintered. It's a standard 12-foot pine tourney lance, he said. Now it's down to 11 feet. War lances are heavier, he added, weighing it. This is a tourney shaft, plain and simple. Impossible, Old Falcon blurted. War lances tend to be poplar 8-footers with an iron head. Are you blind, or do you intend to call us fools? Someone snapped back. Gerald Dane picked up the pierced grapevine shield and frowned. My lords, both of Sir Arthur's strikes landed in the same spot on the shield. Arthur unclipped his visor and looked down at the still staring nobles with his unruffled violet eyes. Lord Paxter, he said calmly, who says a pine lance can't break a shield? With skill and strength, even a bare shaft can pierce and kill. Mathis Rowan muttered, as if coming to himself, best see to your brother, Paxter. Go and look at his injuries. Red-faced, Lord Paxter swallowed his protest. I withdraw my accusation. I apologize, Sir Arthur. The herald raised his voice. Sword of the Morning, Sir Arthur Snow. 2 rounds, and in one he pierced a shield with a tourney lance, a feat most rare. He takes the victory in this round. Cheer for the Sword of the Morning, Sir Arthur Snow. The high platform erupted in thunderous cheers. The name Sword of the Morning rang out again and again. Chapter 154, Top 7, 2 in 1. After comforting Garth Hightower, Arthur walked up to the high platform seats to watch the next round of nightly duels and study potential opponents. Illyria saw him coming and tilted her head slightly. Her light golden hair caught the sun. "How is Sir Garth?" Arthur's mouth answered before his brain, "Medium rare." Realizing his slip, he cleared his throat and straightened his tone. "The Meister says he fainted from heat stroke. May the Seven bless him to wake soon." Illyria blinked, a mischievous smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks to Dorne's weather. Otherwise, I might have thought you couldn't beat him." Arthur studied her expression and felt a small surge of pride at his performance. How could that be? He lifted the ribbon tied around his arm. "I have the token you gave me. I fight bravely and fearlessly. I will not be defeated." Illyria only shook her head and watched the field. "If my token made someone invincible, Count Barry wouldn't have been eliminated." Arthur followed her gaze. Two mounted knights charged, lances cracking as they met, and wood splintered. "Looks like I missed a fine match," he asked, interested. "Who sent Count Barry packing?" "The mysterious knight Ed serves, Brienne." Illyria sighed softly. Arthur couldn't help but laugh and tease. "Aunt, it seems Ed's taste is better than yours." Illyria made no protest. Arthur noticed, with some satisfaction, that she no longer opposed Ed becoming Brienne's squire. The clash of lances and neighing horses turned the list into a revolving pageant of armored crests. Time slipped by in the excitement, and soon the day's bouts were drawing to a close. Arthur had watched the whole thing intently, but three matches stood out. The first, Loras Tyrell versus Count Quinn Roxton. They broke 8 lances in a brutal exchange. On the 9th, Loras used a feint to nose out a narrow victory. Count Quinn's lands in Old Town lie just across the Red Mountain from Starfall, close neighbors, and House Roxton had once owned a Valyrian steel blade called Orphan Maker, long since lost. The second, Damon Sand against Gerald Grafton. In the 4th tilt, their lances met at the same instant, and both riders nearly toppled. Gerald, fighting on foot, claimed the win with superior swordcraft. The third, Sir Desmond Redwine against Sir Vane of Starfall's vassals. In a single charge, Desmond's lance smashed the faceplate of Sir Vane's modified barrel helm, unseating him and rendering him senseless. After the match, Arthur went to the first aid tent. Sir Vane lay with his right cheek grotesquely swollen. A maester tended the wound, and a wooden tray bore 7 teeth stained with blood. "How is he?" Arthur asked quietly. "Dislocated jaw, lost 7 teeth," the maester replied, wiping his brow. "Luckily none lodged in the windpipe. I cleaned him and gave Poppy milk. If he wakes, he'll only be able to chew on the left side." "Take good care of him," Arthur said. Then, turning to Sir Vane's wife and children, he added, "If you need anything, come to Starfall and find me." They offered grateful, tearful thanks as he left. Accidents like this were part of mounted jousting. Armor did not make men invincible. The head was a small, difficult target, but a hit could end a man. Arthur had not expected House Redwine to field so talented a jouster. He only wondered, was Desmond bald? As the saying went, bald men seemed somehow harder. Outside his tent, a group waited. "My lord, Sir Jimmy Sunderland won the archery," Vicwood called, spotting him. "You missed it," Vicwood crowed. "His and Angai's shooting were divine. At the normal 100-yard range, every arrow hit the bullseye. The judges had to move them back twice, and it came down at 150 yards. The crowd parted, and Jimmy strode forward, followed by a tall, freckled, red-haired teenager, Angai, the other remarkable archer. Jimmy said in a low voice, "My lord, I have not failed you." "Well done," Arthur clapped his shoulder. "After the tournament, when you keep vigil in the Starfall Sept, I will keep my promise and make you a knight with Dawn." He watched his steady, capable squire and remembered Jimmy as a boy in a white robe and red stripe who dreamed of the Kingsguard. Watching him grow felt like an old father's relief. Jimmy, flush with the 4,000 golden dragons prize, went off to celebrate with squires from the neighboring tents. Arthur did not stop him. He had to prepare for tomorrow's joust and keep his condition. Early the next morning, while Arthur dressed in his armor, only one of his 4 squires arrived on time. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you drink?" "I did." Zack scratched his head and grinned. "I drank, but as we went on, the others all drank themselves under the table." Arthur tied on his gauntlets and smirked. "I didn't expect you to hold your liquor." Zack blinked. I found cups tedious, so I hugged a barrel of amber peach wine, ended up drinking the whole barrel. Not 1,000-cup drunk, Arthur said dryly. Not 1,000, Zach corrected earnestly. A one-barrel drunk. As the tournament narrowed, the stands filled. Arthur's opponent in the 5th round was Sir Desmond Redwine. Desmond rode up during the ceremonial pass and, pulling his visor half down, spat words that dripped with malice. Boy, Sir Pred, the one you hanged in the square, was my squire. Today my lance aims not at your head, but at your eyes. Without waiting for a reply, he snapped his visor shut, drove his horse, and disappeared down the list. Trash talk was common in the Riverlands, and Arthur took it as such, until the trumpet sounded. Purple, his warhorse, lurched like a bolt of purple lightning. Arthur took his shield and couched his lance, watching Desmond's hand. The other knight rode with his lance kept very low. As the horses closed, the lance never rose. Bang! Wood splintered. Desmond's lance didn't aim for the eyes at all. It rode true to the torso. It slid along Arthur's heart-shaped shield and smashed into his chest. The impact shook him. If he hadn't gripped Purple's flanks, and if his vine armor hadn't absorbed some of the force, he might have been unseated. And because all his focus had been on preventing Desmond's promised eye stab, Arthur's counter-thrust had struck Desmond's grapevine shield. Back at the starting point, anger and a cold spike of fear rushed through Arthur. He'd almost been toppled into the ditch. He forced himself to breathe, soaked away the rage, dropped the broken lance, and shouted, "Lance!" Desmond, thinking Arthur had been bested, felt a flash of satisfaction turn to alarm. This sword of the morning was tougher than he'd believed. He'd watched Arthur's matches with care, against Garth Hightower, against the reckless rider Rosso Brunn, and seen the man's horsemanship, reflexes, and jousting skill. Arthur had been arrogantly lighthearted, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. Desmond had planned a single, decisive blow. He had banked on catching Arthur off guard. He wouldn't risk a headshot in a battle of experts. He set his shield to cover the chest and shoved his horse forward. The lances met. Desmond smiled at victory, until his smile rended into horror. Arthur's lance did not shatter against the grapevine shield. The shaft plunged through it like a war lance. A violent force shoved Desmond off his seat, hurling him backward. He became airborne and blacked out mid-flight. Arthur watched the other man crash into the ground and feel a grim satisfaction. Then he reflected on his own near fall. Desmond had mixed truth with lie, low aiming to bait Arthur into defense, then struck where Arthur's attention had been. People tend to believe conclusions of their own making. 8 parts truth and 2 parts falsehood bought Desmond an opening. He also couldn't help but think, with a brief private amusement, that in a way it had felt like cheating. He had a burst attack he called kill. Could one call using tactics a cheat? He decided not. The platform fell into stunned silence for 3 minutes. Earl Paxton was the first to break it. He shouted, red-faced, "He cheated! He used a war lance. How can a pine lance penetrate a shield? Herald, inspect that lance." Arthur was cooperative. He simply sat astride Purple and tossed the shattered lance toward the gathered knights and the herald. Loras Tyrell took it, ran his fingers along the splintered shaft, and announced it was a standard 12-foot jousting lance. Now it's 11 feet with the tip broken. He hefted it. A war lance is heavier. No, this is a regular jousting lance, through and through. "Come on, Paxton," one man called, Old Falcon, blunt as ever. "Everybody knows war lances are about 8 feet of poplar with iron tips. Are you blind, or trying to make fools of us?" Gerald Grafton lifted the pierced grapevine shield, astonished. Both of Sir Arthur's attacks struck the same spot on the shield. Arthur unclipped his visor. His violet eyes, calm and unbaffled, met Earl Paxton's indignation. "Lord Paxton, don't be so surprised. Who says a pine lance can't break a shield? With the right technique and strength, even a plain shaft, without an iron head, can kill." Mattis Rowan didn't hesitate. "Paxton, drop your accusation and go check on your brother." Confronted by in-laws and witnesses, Paxton's face went beet red. "I withdraw my accusation. I apologize, Sir Arthur." With that settled, the herald's voice rang out across the field. "Sir Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning, has performed an incredible feat, penetrating a grapevine shield with a jousting lance in 2 rounds. He wins this bout." Cheers erupted from the high platform, deafening and unanimous. A single cry rose above the rest as people shouted the title like a benediction. Sword of the Morning. The scene for the semifinals was even more spectacular than it had been that morning. The match between the Knight of Flowers and the Sword of the Morning, a contest that had been the talk of the Torrent River territory long before the first trumpet sounded, drew most of the city to the lists. Those who could not get a viewing place clustered around the arena's edges, unwilling to leave until they knew the outcome. As Arthur rode Z into the field, a tide of cheers rose. Shield Breaker, Sword of the Morning, incarnation of a warrior. Z carried itself with its head high, its smoky purple mane catching the sunlight, hooves thudding on packed earth. The horse snorted and pawed impatiently. Arthur felt its excitement and steadied his grip. Loras was already waiting. He wore more ornate scale armor than in the morning, each scale carved with roses and gleaming gold and red. A golden rose sat atop his helm, petaled and clever. It closed when the visor fell. During the ceremonial circuit, Loras had not smiled or cast flowers. His expression was all seriousness. "I have been waiting for this since I left for Starfall," he said, voice hard. "Sir Arthur, Sword of the Morning, I will unhorse you." Arthur put a light hand on Z's neck and smiled. "Then you should ride home and find a bed that helps you fall asleep quickly." Loras's golden eyes flashed. "You can only unhorse me in your dreams." Loras laughed. "I make dreams come true." He snapped his visor down. The golden rose clicked closed. The two mounts passed, Arthur spurring Z past the Pennons to take his place at one end. "The Sword of the Morning of House Dane versus the Knight of Flowers of House Tyrell," the herald cried, his voice tight with excitement. "May the warrior guide a just duel." When the trumpets died, the lists fell into a sudden hush. Even the wind seemed to still, as if it would not miss a single moment. Arthur felt 100,000 eyes on him. He drew a breath and lowered his visor. The world narrowed to twin slits and the clang of his breath inside the helm. The trumpets blared and the horses launched. Arthur had watched Loras's technique. He tended to keep his lance low and only lifted at the very last to frighten a mount into slowing, opening his opponent for an attack. Z was not a mount that could be frightened. Unfazed by the low point of Loras's lance, Z ran full and bold. Arthur felt Z's will as if it were his own. A streak of purple lightning aimed straight for the golden rose. Impact thundered. Lances and shields met with the kind of crash that shakes the bones. Arthur's arm went numb from the blow. Wood splintered as both lances shattered. He gripped Z with knees and breath, absorbing force as the horse carried him to the other end of the lists. The crowd roared. Arthur flexed the numb hand on his shield. Neither man had held anything back. On the second pass, Loras adjusted. He kept his lance level and changed the angle of his shield. He had no wish to repeat another man's mistake. Arthur admired the speed of the change. The Knight of Flowers was unquestionably among the best at mounted jousting. Both men shattered 5 lances in a row. Sweat soaked Arthur's mail and leather, but he had learned Loras's style. On the 6th pass, Loras finished with an arc, trying to slip his lance around Arthur's defense. Arthur tilted, using the upper edge of his shield to catch the blow, and his own lance struck Loras's breastplate. The crowd cried out. Loras answered with even more speed on the next charge. Arthur saw his chance and took the risk. He eased his shield just enough to expose a sliver, and driving his lance to the upper right of Loras's shield aimed at the helm. The crash came so hard his right arm tingled. His lance tore across Loras's battered shield and struck the upper part of the helm. Wood exploded. The golden rose on the helmet rattled and was forced open. Metal petals flew. The blow had opened the rose like a flower. Women on the high benches screamed. Marguerite Tyrell went pale, clutching a handkerchief embroidered with a golden rose so tight her knuckles blanched. Arthur drew his horse back and watched Loras slump over his mount, struggling to right himself. Though Arthur had held much of the force back, the concussion from hitting the golden rose was severe. That Loras could still cling to his saddle and try to rise was unexpected, a stubbornness that earned Arthur's respect. Loras's squires hovered, unsure. Arthur took off his helmet and barked, "Fools, help your master!" The herald descended. The squires eased Loras from his horse and tested him. He was barely conscious. The herald's voice rang clear and bright as he announced, The sword of the morning of House Dane has once again displayed precise mounted lancing. Sir Arthur Snow advances to the finals. The other semifinal had been Gerald Grafton versus Roland Storm. Roland, the bastard knight of House Cairn, fought with reckless bravery. Gerald, Darkstar, with precision and patience. After 6 passes, Gerald took advantage of Roland's overcommitment and unhorsed him with a single, perfect thrust. Roland landed hard, and Count Bryce Cairn leapt from the high stand to check on his kin. The Nightingale banner came down. Only 2 banners remained aloft, both Sword and Star of House Dane and House Snow setting the final. During the rest before the final, Gerald, still marked by the fight, dents and dust on his black armor, found Arthur. He drank lemonade, his voice acid bright. "Dawn has been given to another, sir," he said, "and now you wield a great sword. I was not present for the sword pulling. Had I been, there would be no tournament today to celebrate a new sword of the morning." Arthur felt the thin edge of Gerald's bitterness. He imagined meeting him in Sunspear and hearing Gerald's quiet dismissal of Arthur Dane's fame as tied to his blade. Arthur answered steadily, "If the gods have made us meet here, consider this a supplement to the ceremony you missed." Gerald's eyes sparkled. "If you lose, you must return Dawn to the White Sword Tower." The lists fell quiet. Squires paused with tools in hand. Arthur smiled. "And if I win? Then Darkstar will swear eternal fealty to the Sword of the Morning," Gerald said with a tone that had clearly been prepared for a long time. They clasped gauntleted hands, and in that grip Arthur felt the wheel of fate turn. As the sun slipped toward the west and lit the high stand with burnished gold, the final began. The lists were packed. Arthur rode Z beneath his sword and star, the cheers rolling over him. The sun gilded the edges of his purple cloak. Across the lists, Gerald stood in black armor that drank the light. The Darkstar's banner fluttered like Arthur's, twin faces of the same token. "A civil war of Starfall," the herald cried, thrilled. "Sword of the Morning versus Darkstar. The victor shall place the crown of the Queen of Love and Beauty." They charged. 6 times their lances shattered, the strikes ringing like thunder. Gerald's skill and will kept him in the fight. On the 7th charge, Arthur poured power and something he called assault into his blow. The strike did not sweep Gerald from his saddle. It reared the Darkstar's horse. Gerald vaulted free, avoiding the fall, discarding shield for sword. Arthur did the same. He rolled from his mount, drew Dawn from his back, the greatsword that shone like pale glass, while his other hand found the smaller black blade at his hip. Dawn caught the dying sun and seemed to glow with an inner light. Arthur felt warmth from the hilt even through his gloves. If Gerald could match him in mounted lancing, up close, the odds changed. Arthur dual-wielded Dawn and his black blade and drove forward. At first Gerald parried with desperate skill, but Arthur's blows came like iron on iron, relentless and heavy. After a dozen strikes, Arthur used the flat of Dawn to knock Gerald's battered longsword aside. The Darkstar's hands shook. He could not marshal the strength to signal surrender. Gerald managed a bitter smile as sweat streaked his face. "I've given it my all," he said. "You win, Sir Arthur Snow, Sword of the Morning." Silence held for the space of a breath, then the lists exploded. The cheering was a living thing that nearly shook the high stand to its bars. "Champion! Sir Arthur Snow is champion!" the herald cried, almost swallowed by the noise. Arthur removed his helm and rode a victor's circuit as flowers and ribbons rained. When the shouting quieted enough for the herald to be heard again, he announced, "Please, the champion shall choose the Queen of Love and Beauty." By long custom, the champion placed a crown of roses upon the head of the woman he wished to honor, a choice heavy with meaning. Arthur felt the weight of 1,000 speculations in the sea of faces. Margery watched with a composed mask. Her clenched hands betrayed her concern. Some of the young Dornish ladies made elegant appeals. Illyria, however, lifted a hand and waved, clearly signaling him not to bestow the crown on her. She had told him privately that their relationship needed no such public ceremony, that he, of all people, would be better served by a proper betrothal than by tokens. Arthur set the crown of golden roses and pearls upon the tip of his lance and swept his gaze across the lists. When it fell on Illyria, his voice rang clear for all the field to hear. "Illyria, you deserve this," he said. Please allow me to dedicate the honor of the Queen of Love and Beauty's crown to you, to express my respect. Chapter 156. You are destined to be the queen. Night fell like velvet over Starfall City, the castle towers casting long shadows in the moonlight. Inside the great hall, hundreds of candles trembled on silver candelabra, throwing light onto banners stitched with the purple longsword and a falling star. The final event of the Starfall City tourney, poetry recitation and musical performance, was underway. Still, the nobles' chatter and the crisp clink of wineglasses nearly drowned out the bard's melodies and the soft plucking of lutes. Arthur lounged in the high-backed chair at the head table, fingers tapping the gilded armrest. He watched Illyria, crowned Queen of Love and Beauty and one of the judges, dance in the center of the floor with Earl Barry Dondarrion. Margaery stood nearby, surrounded by a group of suitors, while the other lady judges were busy socializing. Compared to the fierce jousts of the day, this vocal and musical competition felt like a mere formality. The musicians performed dutifully, but few people truly listened. As a lively dance tune from the fiddles began, Arthur rose and asked Margaery to dance. "How is Sir Loras's injury?" he asked. "He fought well," she said as they moved across the floor. "His jousting is exquisite, and he has a stubborn will. I couldn't have won without aiming at his head." She paused, then added, "In the end, you showed mercy." Her hand was light in his, her gold-embroidered skirt fanning like a flower as she twirled. Arthur caught the faint scent of roses in her hair, mingled with expensive perfume. Margaery's lashes fluttered. "Thank you for showing mercy. Loras is very lucky. He's regained consciousness." She had the lowest, sweetest voice, like the bass string of a harp. "The Maester says he needs rest. He was given some poppy milk and is already asleep." "That's good to hear," Arthur said. Accidents happened in tourneys. Even if Loras had been hurt worse, Arthur would not have been bound to blame. Still, needlessly earning a duke's hatred would have been foolish, and that had been one reason he spared Loras. Margaery watched them for a moment, then spoke again. "If Prince Oberyn had received your mercy, perhaps my other brother would be dancing and not lying wounded now." "Accidents are hard to control at a tilt," Arthur answered. "Some accidents are unavoidable, others can be avoided," she said with an edge. "When personal wishes clash with the family's, people often choose badly. You are destined to be queen." Margaery had heard the phrase since childhood. She had been raised to be queen. It was her family's plan, and she had been taught her duty. She watched Illyria and Earl Barry laughing not far off. "I envy Illyria and Ed," she said softly. "They seem to be able to choose what they like. What they like now might not promise them happiness later, though." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Why say that?" "Margaery, have you heard of my aunt Lyness Hightower and Count Jorah Mormont of Bear Island?" Arthur nodded. "I met them at the victory banquet in Winterfell." Margaery looked up into his violet eyes. She wondered how she would have chosen if she had been wearing the Queen of Love and Beauty crown. The words her grandmother had drilled into her mind surfaced unbidden. Young girls are prone to acting on impulse, especially in matters of marriage, the most important decision of a lifetime. Lyness saw a knight win a garland for her with a lance and thought herself beloved forever. But a knight cannot win garlands forever. Let the knight protect you and let the king marry you. You are destined to be queen. Those words had been both blessing and shackle. She pushed away the dangerous daydreams and said, "Now my Aunt Lyness is in Tyrosh as another man's mistress, and Count Jorah is in exile. Both families' names were disgraced." Arthur forced a polite smile. "Thank you for the reminder. I will consider my choices carefully." The music cut short, and Arthur and Margaery bowed before parting. Back at the head table, Arthur finally allowed himself a drink. He had not touched wine during the preparations. No sooner had he lifted the silver cup than Ed came darting over. "Cousin, I want to be Miss Brienne's squire," Ed announced. Arthur nearly choked on his wine. "I want the stars in the sky," he retorted. Ed's eyes widened. "Didn't you support me?" "Brienne is a lady, not a knight. She cannot have a squire, only a handmaiden. How about I disguise you as a girl?" Arthur said dryly. "You already caused Miss Brienne a great deal of trouble and drawn a lot of criticism." "You don't know Miss Brienne," Ed protested. "She has more of a knight's honor than many knights, and she can fight just as well. If her horse hadn't stumbled, she might have been queen of love and beauty herself. "You little rascal," Arthur muttered, wiping his mouth. After Margaery's words about Lyness, Arthur had planned to have Ed become Earl Barry's squire, as in the old story, dangerous, but safer than following Brienne into the world's hazards. Ed, however, seemed fixed on Brienne. Arthur thought for a moment, then offered, "I'll ask Lord Selwyn if he'll take you as his squire. He's taught Brienne. If anyone can train you like her, it would be him." Arthur remembered Lord Selwyn, the so-called Twilight Star, who had stayed on Tarth and kept out of mainland quarrels. Ed's face brightened. "Cousin, you're too good." He almost leaped up, but was held in by a warning look from Arthur. Between dances and obligations, Arthur scarcely had time to eat. As the tourney champion and the new sword of the morning of the Dane family, he was constantly pulled onto the floor. By the sixth dance, sweat had soaked his expensive silk shirt against his back. He snatched a few bites of roasted peacock when summoned to dance again. As the banquet wound down, the judges announced the winners. Walter, the Blue Bard, was chosen unanimously by the panel that included Illyria and Margaery. The young bard was striking, every piece of him blue, from boots to gloves, his shoulder-length curls dyed indigo. As he accepted his prize, Arthur noticed the unabashed admiration in the bard's eyes as they lingered on Margaery. Chapter 157. Change. 3 days had passed since the jousting tournament ended. Nobles from across the seas had returned to their homes, and the crowds that had flooded Starfall City ebbed away like a tide. The territory slowly returned to its old calm, the only interruptions the occasional clatter of hooves. Inside the Sept of Starfall, green incense smoke curled in the shafts of light. Arthur, wearing a purple robe threaded with silver and with dawn strapped to his back, stood before the statue of the Seven. Jimmy Sunderland knelt before him in new, gleaming armor. Arthur drew Dawn with a slow, practiced motion. The glass-like blade scattered the morning sun into colors. He laid the sword across Jimmy's shoulder. The metal rang against the cuirass. "Jimmy Sunderland of the Three Sisters," Arthur intoned beneath the dome of the sept, solemn and clear. "In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave." The sword moved from right shoulder to left in a graceful arc, leaving a faint, humming note in the air. "In the name of the Father, I charge you to be just." Arthur's gaze was sharp. He looked Jimmy in the eye and saw the same bright mixture of resolve and hope he remembered from his own dubbing at Sunspear. The vows fell one by one. The sept was so quiet the crackle of candles could be heard. When the last word faded, Arthur sheathed Dawn with a clean, familiar scrape. "Arise, Sir Jimmy Sunderland." He stepped forward and embraced the young man. Beneath the armor, Arthur felt the tension in Jimmy's shoulders, felt the slight tremor in his back. "You were an excellent squire, and you will be an excellent knight." Jimmy tightened his sword belt with hands that shook. Tears shone like dew in his eyes. "Thank you, my lord," he choked. "It means everything." Arthur clapped him on the shoulder and retreated with Illyria to the viewing seats. His aunt wore a silver-gray gown and amethyst pins in her hair. Through the sept's arch, he watched Jimmy as friends and retainers crowded around, offering congratulations. "Are you leaving this afternoon as well?" Arthur asked quietly, watching Ed weave through the circle of well-wishers. Illyria had told him the day before she'd received an invitation from Earl Barry to travel to Blackport. She smiled. "I meant to stay a while longer in Starfall, but Ed is going to Tarth to be a squire under Lord Selwyn. I'll go with him so I can look after him." "All right." Arthur watched Ed congratulate Jimmy with shining eyes. "I'll invite Master Oswell and the old instructor to lunch at noon, a proper send-off." After the knighting, Arthur and the stewards, including the rotund fat Karen, plunged into the business of closing accounts. They tallied expenses, inspected storehouses and receipts. The summary parchment matched Fat Karen's earlier estimates. The champion's purse took the largest share. The costs of renovating the tilt yard, expanding the Dawn Market, and the Star Post Fort villages made up the rest. Arthur allowed himself a small, private satisfaction. He had won the Mounted Lance event, and Jimmy had taken the archery prize. The best spoils had stayed close to home. Arthur walked the tilt yard beneath the bright sun. The ribbons on the wooden stands had not yet been taken down and fluttered in a gentle breeze. "Don't let this place fall to ruin," he told Fat Karen. tracing an imagined plan with a finger. "Turn it into a proper knight's ground and an archery range, and open it to the townsfolk." Fat Karen looked puzzled, brows knitting. "Open to the public?" "Not costly," Arthur said, watching the hoof prints of various depths across the field. "Let people ride and shoot here. Hold small mounted lance and archery contests regularly. The purses needn't be large. Hire knights and archers as instructors. Set up cavalry and archer camps for training." Fat Karen fumbled for his notebook and began to write, quill scratching. "Understood, my lord." Arthur's aim was plain: raise the martial skill and spirit of Starfall's people so that, should war come, the conscripts from the territory would be better trained than most. By the time he finished the inspections, the sun was high. A savory smell drew them to the small dining hall. Servants set before them a generous noon meal: honey-glazed ham, lemon-baked salmon, mushroom cream soup, fried seagull eggs dusted with chili flakes, and amber peach wine. "Ed." During the meal, Arthur slid a narrow sandalwood box across the table to his cousin. "A gift for becoming a squire. I made it myself. Take care of it." Ed could barely eat. He flipped the lid and gave a delighted gasp. "A sword." He almost tipped his wine. He drew it out with reverence. The black blade seemed to flow like water. A snowflake peach mark glittered on the hilt. "Is this really mine?" Arthur nodded. Ed ran his hand over the blade as if not quite believing it. "Cousin, I'll treasure it." The sword in Ed's hands was the female of the yin-yang twin swords. The male had been melted into the azure wave sword Arthur bore. Arthur had given Ed the twin both as reward and as insurance against the boy's streak of rebellion. The twin blades carried a strange bond. The male could sense the location of the female, though only for its rightful wielder. At the far end of the table, Master Oswell's thin, aged frame seemed more frail than ever. His voice had grown hoarse, but there was relief in it as he spoke. "I have written to the Citadel. I've requested a maester to take up my duties. The Dane family is blessed, truly." He gave Arthur a look full of warmth. "The gods have smiled on you again, a sword of the morning." Arthur's smile was small and sad. "Our blessings come because of your loyal service, Master Oswell, and the old instructors." Master Oswell's resignation had been expected. He was old. In the past months, he had slept more than he had woken. The fulfillment of a long-held wish had taken something from him. At that moment, the old instructor rose as well. He cleared his throat, the lines on his face deepening. "Allow me to step down as instructor of Starfall City," he said. "I was wounded in the fight with the Vulture King. My strength fails me. It is time I return to Meteor Fort and live out my age." Arthur raised his cup. "Thank you for your years of service. I will appoint Sir Bard as the new instructor." Ed, who had been buzzing with excitement, blinked red-eyed as he toasted. The lunch ended with a steady sadness, the slow parting of an old guard. Late afternoon painted the east gate in gold. The expedition bound for Tarth was ready. Horses and mules, wagons hitched and stamping. Arthur would not let Ed go alone. He ordered 7 fully armed guards and sent Vicwood and Vic Six to ride with his cousin. Count Selwyn had accepted Ed as a squire and had agreed with Arthur to fold Tarth Island into the port warehouse network centered on Bravos. The logistics chain now ran from White Harbor, the Three Sisters, Pebble Isle, Bravos, and Pentos, through Tarth to Starfall Port, a full trade route. Vicwood and Vic Six would help lay the groundwork for a warehouse on Tarth and prepare to trade amber peach wine. Illyria rode a silver-gray mare and waved. Earl Barry rode beside her and waved too. Ed showed off his new sword to Vicwood and Vic Six as he mounted. Arthur stood at the city gate and watched the banners. Starfall, Blackport, Tarth fade down the road. Hooves beat rhythm. The sound lessened until the banners became small dots on the horizon. He felt the shift keenly, a hollow at the center of the castle. The sun still warmed his face. The wind was still gentle, but the place seemed subtly emptier. The captain of the guard came up and asked softly, "My lord, shall we close the gate?" Arthur inhaled, looked toward the road, and shook his head. "Wait a while longer." He could not help recalling the first time he had come to Starfall City. The memory prickled at the back of his eyes, and for a moment the wind felt like sand. Chapter 158, Intensify. Not long after the group bound for Tarth Island departed, Starfall City received another visitor. Earl Paxton, Arthur announced from the center of the reception room, forcing a smile. "The Starfall City banquet is coming up. We could dine together." Earl Paxton had been pestering Arthur about agency agreements ever since Arthur secured deals with Houses Fowler, Rowan, and Tarth to sell amber peach wine and other vintages from the peach garden. He had shown up repeatedly to press for terms. His tone had softened since Arthur had, in the 5th round of the joust, pierced Sir Desmond Redwine's grapevine shield. That blow seemed to have cracked some of Paxton's resolve. He'd been coming almost every day to negotiate. "No need," Earl Paxton said, face grave. "We've already discussed everything. The terms I proposed yesterday are my final bottom line." He drew 2 parchment scrolls from his cloak. "If you agree, sign and seal them. If you refuse—" He let the sentence hang, his Adam's apple bobbing with the unspoken threat. "I'll return to Arbor tomorrow and never come to Starfall City about this again." Candlelight trembled across the reception room, throwing the 2 men's shadows long across the stone walls. Arthur accepted the scrolls. The parchment whispered as he unfurled them. He moved to the window and read by the last slanting rays of daylight. The terms were neat and plain, the ink still fresh. The profit split had shifted from 70-30 to 50-50. Earl Paxton would send his daughter, Desmera, to serve Illyria as a lady-in-waiting. If Ed married Desmera after her first menstruation, Earl Paxton would add another 10% of the profits as a dowry. Arbor would honor the agency agreements Arthur had already signed for the Stormlands, Riverlands, and Dorne, and would not sell the Peach Garden wines in those regions. At the same time, Starfall City's Peach Garden could neither grant authorizations for other regions nor renew contracts once the 3 regional agency contracts expired. Everything else remained the same. Starfall supplied the goods, and Arbor sold them under its brand. Arthur's eyes rose from the contract to the darkening sky beyond the window. If Paxton had offered this deal at their first meeting, he might have given it serious thought. But now, the logic of cooperation had changed. Amber peach wine was no longer just a profit source. Through agency deals, it was a vehicle for spreading Starfall City's influence across Westeros. The port warehouses and logistics were steadily improving, so Arbor's distribution channels were less indispensable. What Arbor really offered now was reputation and brand. "This contract holds no appeal for me anymore." He rolled the parchment up and handed it back. His voice was calm, resolute. "I refuse." Earl Paxton's expression hardened in the candlelight. His gleaming bald head made the grimace almost comical. He said nothing further, tucked the scrolls away, and turned to go. His back carried a heavy, immutable gloom as he left. Arthur stretched and then walked down the corridor to the small dining room. The table was laid with familiar dishes: honey-roasted capon, bread dusted with chopped nuts, and a steaming bowl of carrot, onion, and crucian carp soup. The seats, however, were empty. Illyria was absent, Ed's excited chatter nowhere to be heard, and neither the old instructor nor Master Oswell had come. Arthur sat alone at one end of the long table, silver cutlery gleaming in the candlelight. He stared at the vacant chair opposite him and, without quite realizing it, spoke. Have someone call her over." He started at his own words. The servant standing in the doorway poked his head in, puzzled. "My lord, did you want to invite someone to dine with you?" Arthur hesitated, unable to think of anyone to name, and waved his hand. "Never mind. It's nothing. Go back to your duties." The servant bowed and departed, his footsteps fading down the corridor. For the first time, Arthur felt what true loneliness could be. The feeling, though, didn't linger. There were too many matters in Starfall City that demanded attention. The hired knights left after the tournament still needed arrangements. The unruly barbarian tribes in the Red Mountain required a firm hand, and the Dane family's historic title as Guardians of the Torrent River had to be secured. He planned to tighten control over the Bremon family upstream to do so. The next morning, in the small council hall of the main keep, Arthur received the lists he had asked for. "My lord, the lists you requested," panted portly Karen as he handed over a stitched booklet. It contained the talent roster Karen had compiled during the tournament. "Those hired knights, archers, and warriors willing to stay are mostly camped outside the grounds," Karen reported. "Some are billeted in taverns, a few at brothels for entertainment, and a few are convalescing at Singye Fort under the Meister's care." Arthur scanned the names quickly. 56 hired knights, 49 squires attached to them, and well over 100 archers and foot soldiers. In all, more than 300 combat-seasoned men. These were professionals, far superior to untrained levies. He closed the booklet. Tell them to assemble at the tournament grounds this afternoon. I'll discuss hiring terms in person. After Karen left, Arthur turned to Sir Bard. How goes the relocation of the Mountain Legion families? Sir Bard answered. All the Mountain Legion families from the other tribes have been moved to Violet Canyon, except for the Vulture tribe. The Vulture King's tribe is where the Vulture King came from. The current leader there is a hardliner. He refuses to cooperate. He not only obstructed the relocations, but detained our Mountain Legion soldiers who went to relocate the families. You told us to avoid clashes with the tribes, Sir Bard added. That's why it's been delayed. A cold light passed through Arthur's eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to be so bold, but the pieces fit. The Vulture King was likely backed by the Bremons, and the Vulture tribe would remain under Bremon influence. Making the Vulture tribe the first to resist would test and worsen relations between Starfall City and the Red Mountain clans. Most other tribe leaders had been ready to release people and were staying cautious. Arthur made his decision. Begin relocating the families of the Mountain Legion. Sir Bard looked taken aback. Shouldn't we punish the Vulture tribe first? Acting without retaliation might embolden other tribes to rise up. Arthur didn't explain. At the same time, spread word that the Mountain Legion will be expanded, doubled to 400 men. Seeing Sir Bard about to protest, Arthur added quietly, execute it. Arthur meant to escalate. By pressing on with family relocations and publicly swelling the Mountain Legion, he would force a reckoning. Which tribes were genuinely loyal and which were merely pretending. With the Mountain Legion, an elite, reliable force under his command, he would have the strength to quickly put down any rebellious clans and clear the way for the full division and integration of the Red Mountain tribes. The afternoon at the tournament grounds buzzed with activity. Hundreds of craftsmen and laborers moved with purpose, expanding and reshaping the place into a proper nightly arena and training field as Quentin had planned. Hammers rang against wooden stakes, saws screamed, and carpenters carried beams beneath the standing awnings. Under those awnings, more than 300 warriors had gathered, some in gleaming plate, others in simple leather, many in rough homespun. Sunlight sifted through the canvas, throwing patches of light and shadow across their faces. It's an honor to serve the sword of the morning, a bearded mercenary knight muttered, hand on his sword hilt, eyes bright with anticipation. The archer beside him sneered, What do you think Sir Arthur wants with us? Why worry so much? A scarred veteran cut in, fingers rubbing against the ridges of his scars. We came for the tournament to win favor and a job at steady pay, nothing else. Agreement rippled through the crowd. Have you heard? A tall, thin youth chimed in. A guy already pledged to Sir Arthur. Jimmy Sunderland, the champion, was knighted by Sir Arthur himself, with Dawn. And Rosso Brunn, said a short, stout man nearby, admiration in his voice. He risked himself to get the Lord's notice. He's with Sir Arthur now, another answered. I drank with him yesterday. Small clusters formed, voices low and excited as they traded news. Then a sharp-eyed man pointed to the south side of the grounds and shouted, Look, that's Starfall's banner. Sir Arthur is here, the sword of the morning. Silence snapped over the crowd as a troop of 30 cavalry approached in steady formation, the purple banner snapping in the wind, the embroidered longsword and falling star gleaming. At their head rode a tall man on a purple horse in black barding. He bore a longsword at his hip and another on his back, and he rode bare-headed, black curls drifting in the breeze and unmistakable violet eyes fixed on the platform. It was Arthur. Behind him came figures whose names had been on every tongue since the tournament. Gerald Dane, Jimmy Sunderland, Rosso Brunn, Angai. Arthur drew his mount to the platform where he had watched the matches, dismounted with practiced ease, and strode up with his purple cloak trailing. Sirs and brave warriors, his voice carried, clear and strong across the hush. You have waited long. I believe most of you here wish to serve Starfall. A murmur of assent passed through the crowd. Arthur lifted a hand to still them. I cannot take everyone. I don't know you well enough, so you will be assessed and placed where you best serve Starfall. How will the selection be made? Someone called. Arthur smiled faintly and nodded to the 4 men behind him. These are warriors who proved themselves in the tournament. You will be divided into 3 branches: cavalry, infantry, and archers, just as you competed. They will assess you, and your specific tasks and stations will depend on your choice and performance. Fat Karen waddled forward then, his round belly showing as he wiped sweat from his brow. He read the terms aloud. Cavalry accepted into the mounted troop would earn 2 gold dragons a month. Infantry and archers would enter guard and archer companies, respectively, paid 35 silver stags a month. Those who excelled could be kept on as instructors at the grounds, with their pay doubled. A sound of astonishment ran through the crowd. Not as lavish as tournament prizes, but steady wages and a roof over one's head were precious. Arthur struck while interest was high. After you pass the assessment and swear allegiance, Starfall will issue a full set of standard equipment forged in the Smithy district. After 5 years' service, that equipment becomes yours. A pause hung in the air, then the mood shifted. Men who had been swapping jokes and swaggering at one another now glanced with new calculation. The standard gear from the smithy was known to be worth at least 30 gold dragons if bought outright. It was less about mistrust than the nature of the prize. Competition sharpened into determination. The crowd sorted itself into 3 orderly lines. Under Gerald Dane and the others, groups were taken off for assessment. Arthur had already assigned duties for his 5. Gerald Dane would be administrator of the expanded grounds, managing the venue, organizing instructors, and holding regular tournaments. And Guy would assist him and oversee the training ground, with a focus on archery instruction. Rosso Brunn would command the newly formed cavalry. Jimmy Sunderland would take charge of the archer contingent. As the selection began, Arthur and Quentin walked the grounds to inspect the renovation plans. Quentin pointed to a new fenced area near the old archery range. "This will be the training ground," he said. "I've divided it by range and target size, so archers of every skill level can train properly." Arthur's gaze took in the neat rows of targets and marked distances. He nodded. Quentin went on, "We've set up a bow-making workshop beside the range, so craftsmen can adjust designs based on what instructors report." "Good," Arthur said. He turned to Fat Karen. "Standardize bow production by draw weight. Establish a guild so craftsmen and trainers can coordinate." Fat Karen scrawled notes with fat, efficient fingers and nodded. Quentin led them toward another stretch of open ground. "This will be the nightly jousting field. It's usable year-round for riding drills, and the current mounts can be employed straight away." He pointed to wooden structures downfield. Novices can practice on hobby horses and dummies before advancing to steady war horses. Finally, they came back to the main tournament area where Arthur had first spoken. Quentin gestured with evident pride. "I'll keep the original ground, but convert the high platform into stepped seating and add another tier behind it. We'll fit more spectators and make viewing easier." Arthur paused, surprised at the resemblance to a Roman amphitheater, but saw the advantage at once. With a proper jousting field, training facilities, workshops, and accessible stands, the grounds would draw more participants and a larger crowd. More people watching meant more recruits, more trade, and a livelier life in Starfall. He allowed himself a small smile. It was the sort of plan that changed more than a field. It would change a city. Red Mountain, Vulture Tribe Camp. The mountain wind bit like a living thing, shrieking through the bare rock faces and tugging at the tatters of old banners. 2 years after the Free Folk's crushing defeat on the west bank of the Torrent River and the death of the Vulture King, the camp had lost whatever authority it once commanded over the tribes of Red Mountain. The large tent that had once belonged to the Vulture King still bore traces of its past glory on its animal hide walls. The perch where Sharp-Winged Jolly, the hawk tamed by Lord Arthur, used to roost stood empty. Chian, the current leader of the Vulture tribe, sat on a rough wooden chair, fingers tapping impatiently on the armrest. He had the same hard, eagle-eyed face as his father had. Around the central fire pit, a dozen tribal leaders had answered his summons, their faces lit in the flickering light and clouded with worry. Chian felt a thrill of triumph beneath his caution. He had broken the subjugation contract with Starfall City, obstructed the relocation of Mountain Legion families, and detained soldiers who were supposed to move out. It had been a gamble, but Starfall City, distracted by the tournament in the Violet Canyon, had not punished him. His defiance had earned him prestige among the tribes, and with the Mountain Legion now beginning to recruit more and relocate families, many had come to admire his boldness. An old, wrinkled chief banged his knee and spat, voice rough. "Now, the Mountain Legion says they'll expand. Everyone wants to join the selection. If this keeps up, all our warriors will leave. Who will hunt or farm? How will the tribe survive?" "And those who have already moved their families," another muttered, fingers worrying the dagger at his waist. "Will they even come back when the northern tribes strike?" A lean leader looked up, slyness in his eyes. "Starfall City signed a contract to protect us. If they don't honor it, why should we?" "You imprisoned our Mountain Legion soldiers," someone asked. "Not just imprisoned." The lean leader sneered, showing yellowed teeth. "I gave a few stubborn ones 30 lashes, split skin, open flesh. If I didn't, who would obey me? The young and strong have already fled to the Violet Canyon to try their luck in the selection." Qian watched each face, measuring reactions. The tent flap yanked open, and everyone fell silent as a white-haired figure stepped inside, dressed in a Mountain Legion uniform. "Xiang Ni?" a leader hissed, hand on his weapon. "Why is he here?" "Look at him," another spat, as if he were one of Chameleon Shigu's men. Qian rose smoothly, hand pressing the tent wall as if to steady himself. "I invited Leader Xiang Ni. He's always been one of Red Mountain, and he taught me when I was young." He went to Xiang Ni's side and clapped the old man's shoulder with a show of affection. "I give my word he won't leak what happens here." A few nodded, others still eyed the old instructor suspiciously. Xiang Ni said nothing, taking a corner seat as the firelight picked out the deep grooves of age and battle on his face. Qian raised his voice. "I heard you all complain about Starfall City relocating Mountain Legion families and recruiting tribal warriors. That's why I called this meeting." He let his gaze sweep the circle like a torch. "Over the past 2 years, our tribes have been hollowed out. Men have left for pay and easy living in the Violet Canyon. If it goes on, either some northern lord will swallow us or we wither away." He slammed his fist on the table, so hard wooden cups tipped and splashed. "We must rise and fight." "Fight?" a leader whispered, aghast. "Do you mean war? Better to fight than wait to die." Qian drew his short sword and pointed its tip up to the tent peak. "Have your leaders lost the courage to fight?" "We don't lack courage," an older chief said, standing and running his fingers over an empty scabbard. "We lack swords, spears, armor, and the fighters to wield them." Qian's mouth twisted. "You're afraid. The lords down in the valleys are not invincible." At his clap, the flap opened again, and a new figure entered, lean, cruel-eyed, a jagged scar running from forehead to chin. "This is Kara of the Mount Shadow tribe," Qian announced. "He took first in the team melee at the last Starfall City tournament. He proves what bravery wins." "Mount Shadow?" someone grunted. "A northern tribe. Prize money over 1,000 gold dragons," another said, eyes bright. Qian ignored the chatter. "Besides Kara and his warriors, I've made contact with a strong ally from the upper torrent, the Bremon family. If our 3 forces unite, we can avenge the humiliation of 2 years ago and the free folk who fell." He cut his palm with a dagger, letting blood drip into the wine bowl and then smearing it across the leather of a written covenant. "We'll form a blood alliance. Elect one leader to command the war against Starfall City." One by one, the leaders rose, cutting their palms and pressing their bloody fingers to the covenant. Qian, as organizer, was chosen the alliance leader. They dispersed to gather their people and wait for the signal. When the tent emptied, Qian turned to Xiang Ni. "Why haven't you spoken, Uncle Ni?" Xiang Ni's sigh carried the weight of age and experience. "Stop this, child. You cannot defeat Lord Arthur. Things are different now. If this had been before subjugation and before the Mountain Legion was formed, we might have stood a chance. But Starfall City has stamped out rebellion, bound its vassals, and its fortresses are iron." He met Qian's eyes. "The free folk were broken at the Torrent River's west bank. The Mountain Legion has offered coin and a good life to our men. They are gone." Qian snorted. "Bravery wins what coin can't. If we can beat them, You've never seen Lord Arthur fight. Xiangni's cloudy eyes flashed with a remembered horror. I have. I saw it. At the battle on the torrent's west bank, he rode a cavalry that punched through our lines 7 times. When the longsword meteor banner flew and that two-sword figure stood beneath it, the bravest among us lost heart and surrendered. Xiangni's hand trembled. At that time, he was not yet widely known as Sir Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning. If his courage frightened me, it was his rule afterward that made me despair. He leaned closer. I took the post in the Mountain Legion to infiltrate and wean the Legion to our cause, but after watching how Arthur governs the Violet Canyon, he stabilizes it, gives order. I will not work against him. Chan's hope flared. Uncle Ni, if you can turn the Mountain Legion brothers, we might yet do this. Xiangni shook his head. You don't understand their discipline. Did any of the 3 soldiers you detained give in? Chan's face went shadowy. None had, despite threats and persuasion. Indeed, he admitted, voice near a whisper. Xiangni asked coolly, the ally you spoke of, the Bremon family? Chan froze. How did you know? Your father told me 2 years ago. They promised him they'd attack Starfall City's main force, but when war came, I saw no Bremon soldiers. Same trick twice. Xiangni's voice was bitter. There'll not be a retreat route for you. Chan clung to one last hope. Then at least there'll be a place to fall back. Xiangni's mouth flattened. You know how Red Mountain runs. Strength rules. Fail and your people won't follow you. Bremon, having lost value, will seek how to silence you, not shelter you. He leaned back, weary. Those chiefs who cursed Shigu the Chameleon, is their hatred for betrayal or envy of his status? Some men live to seize any chance to become a chameleon. They swore an oath here tonight because oaths are sometimes all some men have left. Uncle Ni, I will not turn back, Qian said. Then release those soldiers and their families and come with me to beg Arthur's forgiveness, Xiongni said quietly. Qian's jaw hardened. He killed my father. I will not beg forgiveness of my father's killer. Xiongni said no more and rose to leave. He pushed aside the tent flap, old shoulders hunched under his cloak. A flash of movement blocked his path. Kara stood there now, flanked by guards whose axes glittered coldly. Qian's voice, thin and intense from behind, called, I will not turn back. The old instructor halted and wheeled, sensing a breeze at the back of his head. Years of battle made him move before thought. He bent down to avoid a blow. Boy, what are you doing? He snarled, hand going to the haft of his axe. He never finished reaching. A scarlet dagger slid between rib and neck and sank into the soft flesh at the base of his skull. Blood burst out in a spray that splattered the tent wall and dripped hot onto the ground. Xiongni's eyes widened in disbelief. His knees buckled, and he went down. Qian stumbled forward, face ashen. What have you done? He cried, voice strangled. I never meant to kill him. I only wanted to keep him from leaking our plans. Kara pulled the dagger free and wiped it casually on Xiongni's Mountain Legion tunic. His lips quirked in a thin, cruel smile. He knew too much, and those chiefs in here, many of them have their own secret aims. His voice was calm, almost clinical. Cut his head off and send it to the tribes. Then send Bremon's letters and the Covenant to Starfall City, so they'll be forced to choose. Join us, or watch as their own allies are hung between 2 fires. Either Starfall falls and the Sword of the Morning is broken, or their heads will fall one by one before our great white blade. You are mad, Qian whispered. Kara laughed, a hard, bitter sound that tore the hush like a blade. I will not see the free folk of Red Mountain kneel and be consumed by the Sword of the Morning like you. Our ancestors never bowed. We will not bow to these weaklings. Outside, the mountain wind howled on, indifferent, as if it had always known which way the tribes would turn.